Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Opened the Greenlit Café? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. The bell above the door jingled softly as the first rays of morning sunlight slipped through the windows, painting the wooden floors in warm, golden hues. It was quiet, peaceful, like the world hadn't quite woken up yet. Izuku Midoriya wiped the last bit of foam off the countertop, then straightened with a tired but content sigh. His apron was already dusted with flour and coffee stains, curls a little messy, freckles catching the soft light. He adjusted the open sign on the door before turning back into the heart of the cafe. The Greenlit Café. It had taken him over a year to bring it to life. A quiet dream born not from ambition but necessity. A place for everyone. Heroes, villains, outcasts, nobodies. People who had nowhere else to go, just like him. As long as they respected the rules, they were welcome. No fighting. No discrimination. No destroying property. Simple rules. The kind he wished the world had followed a long time ago. He stepped behind the counter and flipped on the espresso machine, listening to its low hum. It was still early. School had just started for most people, meaning he had a good hour before the rush. If there even was a rush today. Izuku, he muttered to himself, checking the stock of milk. You forgot to pick up more oat milk again. He scribbled it down on the corner of a napkin and stuck it under a magnet on the fridge. His handwriting was still a little shaky, old habits from flinching too much as a kid, but it was getting better. The scar above his collarbone itched slightly. He reached up absent-mindedly, tracing it with 2 fingers before catching himself. No more hiding. Not here. This cafe was his. A safe space. And scars were just a reminder that he was still standing. The bell above the door chimed again. He looked up, expecting a DLVY guy or maybe someone who had gotten lost looking for the train station. Instead, a familiar explosion-headed teen stomped in, looking thoroughly irritated. Kaken, Izuku greeted, wiping his hands on a towel. You're here early. Shut it, nerd, Katsuki grumbled, sliding into a stool at the counter like he owned the place. He dropped his school bag next to him with a thud. Class was cancelled. Some villain crap. Figured I'd stop by before your loser cafe got packed. Izuku smiled, genuinely this time. You want your usual? The. He started working on a cinnamon-spiked cold brew, the kind Katsuki pretended he didn't like but always finished down to the last drop. The silence between them was easy now, comfortable. It hadn't always been. There were still things they hadn't said, and maybe never would. But somehow, in the quiet hum of the Greenlit Café, that felt okay. You sleep last night? Katsuki asked suddenly, not meeting his eyes. Izuku paused, then shrugged. A few hours. You know how it is. Yeah, well, the blonde muttered. You look like crap. Izuku laughed softly. Love you too, Kaken. He passed over the drink just as another customer walked in, an older woman with a limp and a hero's badge tucked into her coat pocket. She gave a tired smile and took a corner seat, nodding her thanks. Izuku's heart swelled just a little. This was why he opened the cafe. To serve people who had nowhere else to go. To give them what he had needed when he was a scared, quirkless kid hiding bruises with long sleeves and excuses. And slowly, it was working. Katsuki took a slow sip of his drink, trying to look unimpressed, but Izuku caught the way his shoulders relaxed just slightly. That cinnamon-spiked cold brew was his comfort drink, and they both knew it. I don't know how you do this crap, he muttered, glancing around at the calm, cozy interior of the cafe. The shelves were lined with mismatched mugs and books. A cat-shaped cookie jar sat near the register. There were potted plants in the windows that Izuku talked to when he was bored. Like running this place. Every single day. You're still just a dumbass 15-year-old. Izuku smiled faintly as he wiped a spot off the counter. Yeah, but I'm a dumbass 15-year-old who makes a mean hazelnut latte. That's not something to brag about. Then why do you keep coming back? Katsuki didn't answer. He just took another sip and glared at nothing in particular. The cafe door opened again. This time it was a man in his 20s, face shadowed under a hoodie. His eyes darted around calculating, sharp. Izuku didn't recognize him, but something about the way he moved was familiar. Villain maybe. Or just someone who had learned to survive by watching every exit. Izuku offered a soft, polite smile. Welcome in. Sit wherever you like. The man looked surprised for a second, like he hadn't expected to be welcomed anywhere, but nodded and took a seat in the far corner. He kept his hands on the table the whole time. Didn't take off his hoodie. Kaken leaned in just a little, voice low. You gonna kick him out? No, Izuku said gently. He hasn't broken any rules. Kaken made a face but didn't argue. That was one thing he'd learned quickly about the cafe. Izuku had rules and not even Kaken got to bend them. Villain, hero, nobody in between, it didn't matter. Everyone got the same chance. Izuku made the man a tea without being asked. He walked it over carefully, placing it in front of him with a soft, here. On the house. The man stared down at it, then up at him. You don't know what I've done, kid. Izuku's voice didn't waver. Maybe not. But you're not doing it here. There was a long, tense pause. Then a tiny, barely there nod. Izuku walked back to the counter, heart pounding just a little. Not in fear, he was used to people like that. No, it was something else. That old ache. The one that whispered, this is what you needed. A place where someone saw you and didn't flinch. You're seriously something else, Deku, Kaken muttered, shaking his head. Like, it's not normal how much you trust people. I don't trust everyone, Izuku said quietly. I just remember what it felt like to be treated like a villain before I ever did anything wrong. Kaken went still. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the espresso machine, the clink of a spoon, the soft crackle of music from the radio in the back, it all filled the space between them. Then Kaken said, gruffly, you're not a villain. Never were. Izuku's eyes widened a bit. His chest ached in that complicated way it always did when Kaken said something real. Thanks, Kaken. Yeah, whatever. The bell rang again, letting in a burst of spring air, and with it, 2 schoolgirls in flashy uniforms, giggling about something on their phones. They took seats near the front, their laughter light and bubbly. One of them ordered a strawberry smoothie. The other asked if the cafe had gluten-free options. Izuku was already moving to help, putting on his best gentle smile. But behind him, he heard Kaken mutter, told you it was gonna get packed. Izuku shot him a teasing glance. You planning to help out or just hog the counter? Kaken scoffed. Hell no. I'm not some waiter. You could wipe tables. Do I look like your DMN employee? Izuku grinned. A little. And despite the grumbling, Kaken did end up grabbing a rag and swiping lazily at a few empty tables, complaining the whole time, of course, but Izuku didn't miss the way he glanced toward the register when he thought no one was looking. Protective. Like he was keeping an eye on things. By noon, the cafe was full. A pro-hero with his hood pulled low was reading a paperback novel in the corner. A group of construction workers took their lunch break near the windows. The hoodie-wearing man stayed quiet and still, occasionally sipping his tea. And Izuku. Izuku felt tired. Yeah. His back ached a little. But his heart? His heart was full. Because this was his dream. Not All Might's dream. Not a hero dream. A place where people could breathe. The place where people could be. The Greenlit Café had a rhythm to it. It wasn't loud or busy like some downtown coffee chains. It didn't blast hero-themed playlists or advertise specialty drinks named after pro-heroes. No billboards. No mascots. Just a chalkboard out front, a handwritten menu, and warm light that spilled through the windows like sunlight through leaves. Izuku liked it that way. The cafe started to fill up around 8 a.m. every weekday. Office workers on their way to the train. Parents after school drop-offs. Tired heroes coming off night shifts who just needed something hot and sweet to carry them home. The regulars knew him by name now, and some even brought him little things: extra napkins, books for the shelf, a bag of lemons from their backyard tree. He was always polite. Always kind. Always watching just a little. The first rush died down around 9:30, and Izuku finally got to sit for a moment. He tucked himself behind the counter, sipping a lukewarm matcha latte and scribbling down ideas for new pastries in a little green notebook. Kaken says cinnamon is good. Maybe a cinnamon matcha roll? Or something with yuzu glaze. Try testing tomorrow. He yawned into the notebook and blinked at the smudged ink. You look like you're running on fumes, kid. Izuku jumped slightly and looked up to see Genji, a gruff old man who used to be a rescue hero before retirement. He stopped by every other morning, ordered black coffee and a plain muffin, and always left a tip that was exactly 130 yen. Never more. Never less. I'm good, Genji-san, Izuku replied with a small smile. Just thinking through some new recipes. Genji grunted and picked up his muffin. Don't overdo it. Burnout ain't pretty. I'll try. The old man gave a low chuckle. You always say that. Izuku watched him settle into his usual seat by the window. He pulled out a crossword puzzle and circled his mug with both hands like it was something sacred. Moments like that made it all worth it. By mid-morning, Izuku was back behind the counter, restocking syrup bottles and rinsing out the milk pitchers. The radio played softly in the background, an old pop song he recognized from when his mom used to hum it while washing dishes. He smiled to himself and hummed along, moving automatically, hands in rhythm. The bell rang again. This time it was a younger customer, maybe university age. Bright red hair, long scar across one eye, wearing a faded denim jacket and fingerless gloves. He walked up to the counter with a hesitant smile. Hey, he said, voice casual but unsure. So, this place. Really lets anyone in? Izuku nodded. As long as you follow the rules. No fighting, no hate, no property damage, the guy quoted, pointing at the sign taped to the counter. Kinda wild. Most places freak if you even look like you might have a record. Well, Izuku said softly, everyone deserves a second chance. Or a first one. That got a pause. Then, slowly, the redhead's shoulders eased a bit. I'll just take a coffee. Black. Coming right up. He made it quick and smooth, then slid it across with a soft, here you go. The guy blinked down at it, like he wasn't sure it was real. Then he took a sip and his whole expression changed. Not dramatically, but softer. Like something in him was thawing a little. Thanks, man. Izuku smiled again. You're welcome. The rest of the day came in waves. A pair of exhausted UA support course students came in around noon, arms full of gadgets and notebooks. Izuku made them energy drinks and let them charge their laptops at the corner table. A DLV guy brought a huge box of beans and nearly dropped it on his foot. Izuku helped him carry it inside and gave him a free bagel as thanks. Kaken stopped by again around 3, grumbling about a training exercise that left him soaked and singed, and snagged a chocolate scone before disappearing into the back to dry off. Don't burn the place down while I'm gone. Izuku called after him. Shut up, nerd. It was the most affectionate yelling Izuku had ever heard. Around 4:30, things slowed again. Izuku stood by the front window, wiping down the glass as the sky started to dim. The city outside moved on without him. People hurrying, kids laughing, distant sirens wailing, bikes zipping past. He didn't miss being part of that rush. This cafe was his little pocket of stillness. He turned back toward the interior, toward the shelves of books and quiet music and half-finished drinks. The Greenlit Café wasn't flashy. But it was home. And here, that was enough. This will be really short. It was raining by the time the first customer arrived. Not the gentle kind of rain that made you want to curl up with a book, but the heavy, cold kind that soaked you through before you even noticed. The kind that turned the streets to mirrors and left the sky a dull, bruised gray. Izuku had opened early that morning. He always did on rainy days. There was something comforting about the warm hum of the espresso machine and the soft clink of mugs against wood when the world outside felt soaked and tired. He'd even lit a cinnamon candle and set out a basket of mini muffins by the register. On the house, a sign read in his neat, slightly shaky handwriting. The bell jingled at 7:15 a.m. Izuku glanced up and froze for a second. The boy who stepped in wasn't soaked like most people rushing out of the rain. No umbrella, no hood, just so calm in a way that made him seem carved from the fog outside. His hair was a dusty violet, eyes half-lidded and unreadable. A school uniform hung loosely on his frame, but it didn't match any of the local middle or high schools. He took 2 slow steps in, looked around, then stopped just inside the door. "You open?" he asked, voice low. Gravelly, almost too mature for his age. Izuku blinked back into motion. "Yeah. Come in." The boy stepped fully inside. His shoes squeaked faintly on the floor, but he didn't seem to care. He moved with that same calm, not lazy, just deliberate. Like he had no energy to waste on pretending. Izuku offered a smile. "Take any seat you like. Want something warm?" The boy hesitated for a second longer before answering. "You have chamomile?" "I do." "I'll take that." Izuku nodded and got to work. It didn't take long to steep the tea, but he moved with extra care, warming the mug just slightly, adding a touch of honey without asking. He'd learned to read people fast. This one didn't look like he wanted to talk. Still, when he set the tea down at the table, he said gently, "Bad morning?" The boy stared down at the steam rising from the mug. "But it's just a morning." "Sometimes those are the worst kind," Izuku said, not expecting a reply. He didn't get one. The boy stayed for nearly an hour. He didn't speak again. Just sipped his tea slowly, gaze half turned toward the window like he wasn't really seeing it. A few other customers came and went, one sleepy barista from a rival cafe, an old woman walking her tiny dog, but the boy didn't look at any of them. Eventually, Izuku brought over a plate with a single mini muffin on it. The boy glanced at it, then at him. "It's free," Izuku offered with a shrug. "Rainy day special." Another pause. Then the boy reached for it, slowly. He took one bite. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. At 8:32 a.m., the boy stood up and pulled his hood back over his head. The tea mug was empty. The plate had only crumbs left on it. "Come back anytime," Izuku said as the door opened behind him. "You're welcome here." The boy paused. "Hitoshi." Izuku blinked. "Huh. My name," the boy said without turning. "It's Hitoshi." And then he was gone. Just like the rain. The rain had stopped. It left behind that clean, wet smell that clung to sidewalks and drifted in through the open cafe windows. The sun peeked out from behind thick clouds like it was still unsure if it was allowed to shine. Izuku hummed softly as he wiped down the counter, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He was dressed in an oversized forest green sweater and black apron, hair still a little messy from waking up late. A tray of almond croissants cooled on the rack behind him, and the coffee pot hissed quietly on its final brew of the morning rush. The cafe wasn't full, but it wasn't empty either. An elderly woman read a novel by the window. A tired-looking salaryman snored softly over a half-finished lot. And at a corner table, almost hidden in shadow, Hitoshi Shinso was back. He hadn't said much when he walked in, just nodded at Izuku and sat in the same seat as before. No tea today. This time he ordered a mocha with extra whipped cream and looked genuinely surprised when Izuku gave it to him without blinking. "You remembered?" Izuku grinned. "I'm good at remembering." Hitoshi had huffed, almost a laugh. And now, he just watched. It happened around 10:17 a.m. The bell above the door jingled too hard like it had been shoved. A tall man walked in, loud footsteps, cigarette still smoking between his teeth. Mid-30s, maybe, with jagged scars across his face and a scowl that could shatter glass. His coat was ripped. His boots were muddy. And worst of all, he looked angry before anyone said a word. Izuku's eyes tracked him calmly. "Morning," he offered, polite as ever. "Can I get you something?" The man sneered. "A DMN refund." Izuku tilted his head. "I'm sorry, I don't think." "I was here last week," the man interrupted, voice rising. "You remember me, right? That no villain sign you didn't have? You let those freaks sit here next to me like nothing." A few heads turned. Izuku didn't flinch. "Everyone's welcome, sir. That's one of our rules." The man stepped closer to the counter. "I don't care about your stupid rules," he growled. "You call this a safe space? You're just some punk kid with a martyr complex, playing nice with monsters." The whole cafe went quiet. Even the sleepy salaryman stirred. Hitoshi's eyes narrowed slightly from across the room. Izuku stayed still, hands folded on the counter. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, he said, softly but with no hesitation. This cafe is a place of peace. You're breaking that. The man slammed his hand on the counter. And what if I don't, huh? What if I smash this whole place up? And then, crash. He flipped one of the tables. Not by accident. Wood splintered. A mug shattered. The elderly woman flinched in fear. Izuku's expression didn't change. No smile. No soft voice. Just dead calm. I warned you. The next second happened fast. Too fast for anyone to process. Izuku stepped out from behind the counter in one clean motion, ducked low, swept the man's legs from under him, and flipped him with fluid, practiced precision. Before the man could react, Izuku had his arm twisted behind his back, knee pressed lightly into his shoulder blade just enough to keep him still. I said leave, Izuku said, voice cold. I asked nicely. The man froze, stunned. You don't get to threaten people here. Not my customers. Not this place. Izuku didn't shout. He didn't even breathe hard. Just held the man still gently, but firmly as he reached into his pocket and dialed the local patrol line. Yes, Greenlit Café. I have a violent guest who needs to be picked up. Table smashed, no injuries. Yes, I'm fine. He hung up, then slowly let the man up, still watching him, eyes sharp. Sit down, Izuku said. Wait quietly. And somehow, the man listened. By the time the patrol heroes arrived and escorted him out, the cafe had returned to a nervous silence. Customers whispered. One offered to pay for the broken table. Another asked if Izuku needed help cleaning. He shook his head. It's okay. I've got it. But as he crouched to pick up the broken pieces, a second pair of hands appeared beside him. Purple sleeves. Fingerless. Gloves. That was unexpected, Hitoshi muttered, dropping wood into the trash bin. Izuku exhaled softly. Didn't want anyone getting hurt. You didn't hesitate. I couldn't. Silence hung for a second, heavy with meaning. Then Hitoshi stood, brushing off his hands. I get it now. Izuku blinked. Get what? Why people keep coming back? He paused at the counter on his way out, pulling up his hood. See you tomorrow, Midoriya. And this time, Izuku smiled again just a little. See you, Shinso. It was a slow afternoon at the Greenlit Café. The kind of quiet that hummed gently beneath the jazz playing in the background. Outside, the sky was overcast but dry. Inside, the warm air smelled faintly of espresso and honey. Izuku stood behind the counter, organizing the jars of loose-leaf tea by color and label, humming softly to himself. Shinso hadn't come in today, not yet, anyway, but Izuku had saved him a chocolate chip muffin just in case. He wouldn't admit it aloud, but he kind of liked seeing the corner table occupied by that sleepy-eyed kid who pretended not to care but always finished his drink down to the last sip. The bell above the door chimed. Izuku looked up. The man who stepped in was tall, dressed in black from head to toe, with tired eyes and messy dark hair that looked like it hadn't seen a comb in days. A long scarf was wrapped lazily around his shoulders. He looked more like a sleep-deprived salaryman than a pro hero. But something about him made Izuku's breath catch. Welcome in, he said after a pause. You can sit anywhere you'd like. The man gave a small nod, quiet. He didn't say a word as he scanned the cafe, chose the furthest table in the back, and sank into the seat like he was melting into it. He rubbed his eyes with one hand and let out the softest sigh. Izuku didn't recognize him. Not right away. He only noticed that the man looked tired. Like the world had taken too much from him, but he was still showing up anyway. Izuku understood that feeling. He made him a black coffee without being asked, instinct, and brought it over with a small side of warm lemon cake. The man looked up as Izuku set it down. No sugar. I figured you were the bitter type, Izuku said gently. The man stared at him for a second, then blinked once, slow. Good guess. Izuku smiled but said nothing more. He didn't push. Some people just needed a place to sit and exist. 15 minutes passed before the man finally spoke again. You run this place alone? Izuku nodded from behind the counter. Yeah. You're what, 15? Almost 16. Another pause. You the owner? The man leaned back in his seat, studying him. That's rare. A kid running a business like this. Especially one that allows villains. Izuku didn't flinch. It's not about who people are, he said, wiping down the espresso machine. It's about what they do while they're here. If someone follows the rules, they're welcome. The man didn't reply right away. But when he did, his voice was softer. That's a good rule. Izuku finally glanced up, curious. Do you work in law enforcement? The man gave him a look somewhere between amused and exhausted. Something like that. And then, for a heartbeat, Izuku really looked at him. The scarf. The tired eyes. The way he moved. The deep, unshakable calm. Izuku's heart stuttered. Wait, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Are you Aizawa? The man's eyebrow twitched. Huh. You're Eraserhead? The name came out rushed, breathless, somewhere between awe and disbelief. Izuku hadn't fanboyed in years, not since he stopped believing he could ever be a hero, but now it bubbled up inside him like a spark he thought had died. Eraserhead was the one hero who never sought fame. The one who just did the job. The one who never said quirkless kids couldn't be brave. Aizawa looked slightly uncomfortable at the attention. I'm just here for the coffee. Izuku blinked rapidly, embarrassed. Sorry. I didn't mean to. He bowed instinctively. You're actually my favorite hero. Aizawa paused. Why? That stopped Izuku cold. He lifted his head slowly, genuinely surprised by the question. Because you fight without needing people to praise you, he said, quieter now. You protect people even when they don't see you. You believe in actions over flash. I always admired that. For a long moment, Aizawa said nothing. Then he looked down at the half-finished lemon cake. Good choice, kid. Izuku grinned, small but warm. Thanks. By the time Aizawa stood to leave, the sky outside had gone from gray to pale gold. He pulled his scarf up around his neck, lingering by the door for just a second. That you're doing something good here, he said, almost like an afterthought. Izuku blinked. Huh. This cafe. You made something rare. Don't let anyone take it from you. Izuku swallowed hard. I won't. A nod. And then Aizawa was gone. But the space he left behind somehow felt brighter. The sun streamed through the cafe windows in thick golden ribbons, painting the floor in warm lines. It was one of those rare mornings where everything just clicked. The espresso machine hummed contentedly. The scent of cinnamon buns lingered in the air. Izuku moved behind the counter with practiced ease, pouring steamed milk into a ceramic mug, watching the white swirl cloud through the coffee like ink in water. He loved mornings like this. Usually. But today, something sat heavy in his chest. He didn't know why. Not really. Maybe it was the dream fuzzy around the edges but bitter in tone. Maybe it was the silence that followed it, the kind that felt too much like the old apartment when no one was talking but danger still crept just outside the door. Whatever it was, it tugged at him. Distant but present. Like a memory breathing down his neck. The bell above the door chimed, snapping him back. Morning, came the familiar voice. Still half-draped in his hoodie, hair messy like he rolled out of bed and came straight here, which, to be fair, he probably did. He glanced around, hands in his pockets, and made his way toward the corner seat without waiting for permission. I saved your muffin, Izuku said quietly, pulling it from behind the counter. Shinso raised an eyebrow. You always do? Izuku shrugged. You always show up. That earned a small huff. Not quite a laugh, but close enough. As he handed over the muffin, Izuku's hand jerked just slightly. The warm ceramic of the mug nearly slipped from his fingers. He caught it, but his breath caught too. He blinked. Focus. Noticed. You good? Izuku forced a quick smile. Just clumsy today. Shinso didn't reply. Just gave him a look. One of those quiet, unblinking stares like he was piecing something together but wasn't sure if it was his business to ask. It wasn't. And Izuku didn't offer anything more. A few minutes passed. Izuku returned to the counter, rearranging sugar packets with more focus than necessary. The cafe buzzed gently with small conversations. Peaceful. Ordinary. but he felt off. Like he'd left a window open in his mind and cold air was seeping in. Behind him, Shinso broke the silence again. You seem different today. Izuku didn't look up. Do I? Yeah. Quieter. And you're already quiet. Izuku gave a small smile without teeth. Bad dream? That made him pause, but just for a second. Nothing important, he said lightly. It happens. Shinso studied him for a moment, then leaned back in his chair and reached for the muffin. All right. That was it. No pressure. No lecture. No digging. Just all right. Izuku didn't realize how much he appreciated that until the tension in his shoulders loosened ever so slightly. The rest of the morning moved gently. Shinso stayed longer than usual, sipping tea and watching the world go by. Izuku returned to cleaning, checking the register, and moving about with the calm rhythm he'd built for himself. No one raised their voice. No one broke anything. No one questioned why Izuku flinched when he thought no one saw. And for now, that was enough. The afternoon crowd came and went. Office workers. Students. A local DLVY driver who always asked for whatever's strongest and never clarified if he meant coffee or tea. A pair of pro heroes even stopped in low-key ones Izuku didn't recognize, but they followed the rules and left a generous tip. By late afternoon, the sunlight was starting to fade, washing the cafe in warm orange tones. Izuku was wiping down a table when the door slammed open with a loud bang. The bell above it nearly flew off the hinge. Yo nerd. You alive in here or what? Izuku didn't even look up. Hi, Kaken. Bakugo stomped in like he owned the place. His UA uniform jacket was hanging off one shoulder, his hair more explosive than usual, and he looked like he'd run the whole way over. He paused near the door, squinting around. Why is it so dim and quiet in here today? It's always quiet in here. Yeah, but today it's like funeral quiet. Izuku finally looked up, raising an eyebrow. Do you want a coffee or a cookie or something? I want an answer, Deku. Bakugo strode to the counter. You look like hell. That's not new. I'm serious. Izuku sighed and poured him a cup of the house blend without being asked. He knew Bakugo wouldn't touch anything sugary, but he always accepted black coffee scalding, no cream, no sugar. Brutal, just like him. I didn't sleep great. That's all, Izuku said. It happens. Bakugo narrowed his eyes. Dream stuff again? Izuku's hand froze on the coffee pot just for a second. Bakugo noticed. You gotta stop bottling it up, man, he muttered. You think I didn't know you have nightmares about the sludge villain? Or after that rooftop? That rooftop being the moment All Might told Izuku he couldn't be a hero. Hard to forget. Izuku pushed the coffee toward him. I'm not bottling anything up. I just don't want to talk about it right now. Bakugo didn't argue. He just stared at him, tension crackling around him like static electricity. Then, in a rare display of restraint, he sat down. Fine. But I'm hanging out here today, he said, like it was some kind of punishment. You clearly SCK at taking breaks, and you look like you're gonna collapse. Izuku blinked. Staying? You have training. Done already. He kicked his feet up on a nearby stool. Besides, I know when something's off with you. You get all robotic when you're stressed. I do not. You didn't even argue when I kicked the door open. Izuku opened his mouth. Closed it again. Point taken, he muttered. Bakugo sipped his coffee and scowled. Needs more bitterness. It's literally black. It doesn't get more bitter. Exactly. They sat in companionable silence after that, Bakugo scrolling through something on his phone while Izuku returned to wiping down the already clean counter. But even without words, there was comfort in having someone there. Someone who knew not the full story, maybe, but enough. Someone who didn't expect him to smile when he didn't feel like it. The bell jingled again, and Shinso slipped inside hood up, hands deep in his pockets. He blinked when he saw Bakugo. Bakugo glanced over. Purple. You again. Explodey, Shinso said flatly, then moved past him to his usual table. Izuku watched this exchange with a faint smirk. You two met already? Briefly, Shinso muttered, dropping into his seat. He threatened to blow up my backpack. Bakugo scoffed. You looked sketchy. I am sketchy. Izuku chuckled quietly, the first real smile he'd managed all day. And for a while, the cafe settled into a different kind of quiet, not the eerie stillness of earlier, but the soft, steady kind. Like a storm had passed, and calm was slowly creeping in. He was still tired. Still a little haunted. But with Kaken guarding the front like a grumpy watchdog, and Shinso brooding peacefully in the corner, the weight on Izuku's chest felt just a little bit lighter. It had been a calm kind of afternoon. The kind where the sunlight spilled across the wooden floors in lazy strips, and the quiet hum of soft music blended perfectly with the clink of dishes being washed behind the counter. Izuku had just finished wiping down the espresso machine, lost in the steady rhythm of his little cafe world. Slam. The door banged open, the bell above it rattling like it was trying to flee. Guys! This is the place I saw on that cozy cafe thread. Isn't it cute? A blur of pink hair and boundless energy practically exploded into the room. Izuku's hands froze mid-motion as 4 loud teenagers piled in after her. One with jagged red hair, another with lazy black eyes and elbow tape, a blonde with a smile that screamed, trouble, and of course, the pink one in the lead. Whoa, the redhead said. This place is kinda peaceful. Yeah, and it smells awesome, said the blonde, already peeking at the pastry display. Yo, do you think they sell, like, secret menu items? That's a thing, right? The pink girl Mina spun in place, beaming. I knew this place would be perfect. Little indie cafe, aesthetic wouldn't. Plants, mysterious barista guy with green curls. Izuku blinked. Hi. Oh, she whipped around. Are you the owner? The one who runs this place? You look young. Cool. I'm Mina Ishido. These are my friends Kiri, Denki, Siro. We're from UA. And this is our first time here. Izuku gave a polite little nod, still a little caught off guard by the sudden energy surge. He was about to welcome them properly when, Oi, came a familiar voice from the corner booth. Keep it down, extras. Mina blinked. Wait, Bakugo? The whole squad turned. Bakugo sat with his arms crossed, expression as sour as ever, clearly not thrilled to be spotted. What the hell are you all doing here? You know this place? Kirishima asked. Yeah. So, bro, you've been coming to this cozy little cafe and didn't say a word? Kaminari gaped. What else are you hiding? Do you knit too? I'll blow up your stupid shoes. Mina gasped and spun toward Izuku. Wait, you know Bakugo? Izuku blinked again. Why? We went to middle school together. Oh, Siro drawled. This just got interesting. Shut up, Bakugo snapped, already marching over. Don't make this weird. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck. He didn't know these people. They were loud. Friendly, sure, but he wasn't used to this. His cafe was usually a place of quiet comfort, not 5 teenagers exploring like it was a funhouse. Do you want to order something? He offered. Yes, Mina said, instantly excited again. Everything looks so good. You made all this yourself? He gave a small nod. I bake fresh every morning. Kirishima grinned. Man, that's awesome. Respect. Thanks. Bakugo returned to his usual seat, grumbling the whole way, while the rest of the squad piled into a booth and started arguing over who got which muffin. Izuku slowly relaxed. They were loud, yeah, but they were laughing. He could live with that. Later, as Mina took a selfie in front of the ivy-wrapped window and Siro filmed a dumb video of Kaminari pretending to be a dramatic cafe reviewer, Izuku caught Bakugo watching the chaos with a flat, unreadable look. You didn't tell them about this place, Izuku said quietly, coming over with his usual tray of drinks. Bakugo shrugged. Didn't want to share. Izuku raised an eyebrow. That it's quiet here, Bakugo muttered, glancing away. They're loud. Izuku set the tray down. They're your friends. Yeah. They're annoying. But he didn't look angry. Not really. Izuku chuckled softly and returned behind the counter, a new warmth blooming in his chest. Maybe it wasn't so bad to let the noise in every once in a while. It was nearly closing time. The once warm, golden light of the day had melted into deep hues of indigo and quiet. Most of the lights inside the cafe had been dimmed, save for the soft amber bulbs behind the counter and the tiny fairy lights strung along the window. Izuku stood alone at the register, gently wiping down the counters for the fourth time that night. There hadn't been any customers for the past hour. The cafe always slowed down like this once the sky got dark. Most people were home by now. Izuku liked this time of day. The quiet, the solitude, the stillness of the air. So when the door opened with a soft chime and a breath of cold night air, it startled him. A figure stepped inside. Gaunt. Wearing a hooded jacket with the collar turned up, dark jeans, and staples? The stranger had visible scars. Rough, burnt-looking patches of skin stitched together crudely along his neck and jaw. The air seemed to grow heavier the moment he stepped inside. Izuku blinked, instinctively straightening. Hi. The man's eyes were sharp, tired, blue. He looked around slowly, like taking in the place. Huh, he said, voice low and rough. Didn't think it'd be open this late. We're still open for another 20 minutes, Izuku replied, carefully keeping his voice calm. You're welcome to sit. As long as you follow the rules. Right? The man drawled, stepping closer. No fighting. No discrimination. No property damage. His eyes flicked to the little sign by the counter. Guess that includes no burning stuff, huh? Izuku didn't flinch, but his grip on the cloth tightened slightly. Yeah. That, too. The man Dabi, though Izuku didn't know that yet, let out a low chuckle and sauntered toward a corner booth. He didn't seem particularly interested in causing trouble. Existing. Izuku waited a beat before cautiously asking, Can I get you something? Coffee? Something warm? Dabi leaned his head back slightly, eyes flickering toward the low lights above them. Black coffee. Nothing fancy. Coming up. Izuku moved quietly behind the counter. The soft hiss of the machine and clink of ceramic cups filled the air. He could feel the man's gaze on him, but didn't look up. You're young, Dabi said suddenly. Izuku glanced over. I guess. You run this place alone? Yeah. Dabi let out a small exhale, somewhere between a scoff and a laugh. Must have been through a lot to end up here. Izuku didn't reply. Didn't flinch. Didn't explain. He just set the black coffee on the counter and slid it gently forward. Here. Dabi rose from the booth and approached, wrapping scarred fingers around the mug. His nails were blackened at the edges. His hands were calloused, rough like they'd held fire too long. He took a sip. Seemed surprised. Not bad. Izuku just nodded. Silence fell again. Not uncomfortable. But not comfortable either. Just quiet. After a moment, Dabi set the cup down and tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the boy behind the counter. That you've got a weird aura, kid? Izuku raised an eyebrow. I get that a lot. Dabi smirked, sharp and thin. I bet you do. They stood there, two strangers in the glow of low lights and the scent of coffee beans. No names exchanged. No pasts unpacked. Just quiet acknowledgement. Dabi finished his coffee, set a crumpled bill on the counter, and pulled his hood back up. He paused at the door. Don't get yourself burned, he said softly. This world doesn't like people who make safe places. Then he was gone. Izuku stood alone again, the warmth of the cafe pushing back the chill Dabi left behind. He didn't know who that man was. But he had a feeling it wouldn't be the last time he saw him. Morning light spilled into the Greenlit Café like a gentle wave, painting soft golden patterns across the wooden floors. The scent of warm pastries, fresh coffee, and cinnamon drifted through the air, wrapping around every corner like a comforting hug. Izuku had been up since dawn. As usual, the scones were cooling on the wire rack. The cinnamon rolls were almost done. The espresso machine had been primed, wiped down, and tested twice. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. He was alone, but not lonely. The quiet hum of morning prep had become his rhythm. The bell above the door jingled, and Izuku turned instinctively with a polite smile. Hey, said a voice he was getting used to. Got any of those sweet bean buns today? It was Hitoshi Shinso, Hood up, hands in his pockets, eyes still half asleep. Izuku blinked. You're back early. Shinso shrugged. Didn't sleep. Still. You're always here after noon. I was craving coffee, he muttered, ambling to the counter and eyeing the display case. This place. Izuku felt a small warmth stir in his chest. Well, you're in luck. I just finished a fresh batch. Shinso took a seat by the window, the same seat he always chose. Not too close to the door. Not too far from the counter. Izuku brought him a tray coffee, black, with a hint of nutmeg like he preferred, and 2 sweet bean buns dusted lightly with powdered sugar. You remembered, Shinso murmured, eyes flicking up. I remember everyone's order, Izuku said simply. It's my job. But it wasn't just that. It was comforting. Knowing these things. Remembering the tiny details. It made people feel welcome. That mattered. The bell jingled again louder this time, and Izuku turned in time to see the chaos arrive. Hey Midoriya. Mina practically sang, holding the door open like a grand reveal. Guess who's back with more chaos? Izuku's eyes widened. Kirishima, Kaminari, and Shiro followed close behind, grinning like this was a field trip and Izuku was the teacher they were going to annoy for fun. Behind them, Bakugo stalked in, hands in his pockets, already glaring. Oi extras, keep your volume under 80 decibels or I'm gonna staple your mouths shut with the cookie tongs. You said that yesterday, bro, Kaminari said cheerfully. And I meant it. Izuku sighed quietly and waved. Welcome back. Your muffins are like crack, Shiro said, leaning over the counter. Do you have a secret ingredient? It's cinnamon, Izuku said blandly. Lies, Mina whispered. The 4 teens swarmed a booth while Bakugo went to his usual seat in the corner with the air of someone enduring a punishment he half chose. Shinso quietly sipped his coffee, side-eyeing the chaos without getting involved. Izuku moved through the motions pouring drinks, warming scones, chatting when needed. But he didn't push conversation. He never did. He just made sure people had what they needed. A calm bubble in the middle of the storm. You good? Bakugo asked quietly when Izuku passed his table, delivering his bitter coffee and matcha muffin. Izuku blinked. Yeah. Why? You're tense. I'm always tense. Bakugo leaned back. I can tell the difference. Izuku didn't respond. But he did let out a quiet breath once he got back behind the counter. He was okay. This was okay. But just a little overwhelming. But the cafe was full of life. Laughter. Clattering forks and heated debates about whether Shiro or Kirishima had better luck at claw machines. And then, the bell jingled again. Izuku looked up out of instinct. But it was just a DLVY. Some new ingredients. He signed quickly and returned to his post, eyes scanning the room like he always did. Still calm. Still safe. Still his. Late morning rolled into early afternoon, and the Greenlit Café was still buzzing. Shinso had already left, nodding Izuku a quiet, thanks, on his way out. The Baku squad had also cleared out, dragged away by Mina after a heated debate about who owed whom a smoothie. Now, the cafe had settled into a gentle rhythm. Soft music hummed from the speakers, and a few regulars were typing on laptops or quietly chatting over pastries. Izuku was rinsing out the espresso pitcher when the bell above the door chimed again. He glanced up, expecting another student or salary worker. But instead, a swirl of violet and black entered the cafe like it was a stage. Tall heels. Crimson lipstick. A confident sway of the hips. Midnight. Izuku blinked once, then composed himself like he hadn't just watched a pro hero known for weaponized Stuckton walk into his shop on a Tuesday. She didn't even hesitate, her eyes swept the room, and then she made a beeline for the counter. Good afternoon, darling, she said, voice rich and purring. Izuku gave her a polite, professional smile. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Greenlit Café. What can I get for you? Oh, how proper, she mused, resting one elbow on the counter and propping her chin on her hand. Aren't you a sweet one? I'm the owner, Izuku said simply, used to odd reactions. My name's Izuku Midoriya. Let me know if you have any allergies. Midnight raised an eyebrow, amused. Straight to business, huh? He nodded. It's how I work. Her smile widened. All right then, Izuku. Surprise me. Something with a kick. And sweet. Like me. Got it. He turned, already moving to the espresso machine. Behind him, he could feel her eyes on him, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Just observant. Curious. Izuku whipped up a cinnamon mocha with a bit of chili powder for a spicy twist, dusted it lightly with cocoa, and added a side of lemon shortbread. When he set it in front of her, she looked genuinely impressed. Oh, that smells dangerous, she purred. You sure you're not trying to charm me, Midoriya? Not intentionally, Izuku replied evenly. But I'm glad you like it. Midnight laughed, genuinely, and took a sip. Her eyes lit up. Oh, this is divine. Izuku's lips tugged into a small, proud smile. Thank you. She sipped again, more thoughtfully this time. You're young, aren't you? Not even in UA? No. Shame. You'd make a great support team specialist. She paused. You know a lot about people. I know how to make them feel safe, he said softly, wiping down the counter. That gave her pause. She watched him a moment longer. You really do, don't you? Another sip. I like this place, she said after a moment. No pressure. No judgment. And the best coffee I've had all month. Izuku gave a tiny bow. Come back anytime. I will, she said, standing up and finishing her cup. And next time, I want something decadent. Make me regret it. I'll keep that in mind. She winked at him before sauntering toward the door. Just before leaving, she paused and looked back. Oh, Midnight. Professor Kayama, technically. But you can call me Namuri if you really want to. Izuku blinked. I think I'll stick with Midnight. Her laugh echoed as she left. Izuku stood quietly for a moment, the scent of cinnamon and cocoa still lingering in the air. Another day. Another hero. Another reason to keep this place running. The Greenlit Café wasn't just a business. It was a haven. And it was his. Late afternoon sunlight poured in through the cafe windows, casting golden streaks across the tables. The lull between rush hours was Izuku's favorite time, quiet, steady, predictable. He was restocking the front pastry case with lemon buns when the door chimed again. He didn't look up right away. Be with you in just a sec, he called automatically, wiping a bit of powdered sugar off his fingers. No rush, came a voice, smooth, easygoing, almost amused. Looks like you've got a good thing going here. That voice. Izuku straightened slowly. Standing at the counter, hands in his pockets, leaned slightly to one side like he didn't have a single care in the world. Was Hawks. That Hawks. Red wings tucked loosely behind him. Hair tousled. Visor pushed up to reveal golden eyes that sparkled with a kind of lazy sharpness. Izuku blinked. Welcome to the Greenlit Café. Hawks gave a small, satisfied nod. Knew I smelled cinnamon and peace of mind. Thought I was imagining it. Izuku's lips quirked. You're not. He stepped behind the counter, back into professional mode. Can I get you something? What do you recommend for a guy who's running on 2 hours of sleep and 3 press conferences? Izuku considered. Double shot espresso with whipped cream. And something sweet. To trick your brain into thinking you're being nice to yourself. Hawks chuckled. Man, you are good. As Izuku got to work, Hawks wandered over to the menu board, reading it without reading it. His eyes were more on the shop itself. Every little corner. Every detail. Didn't expect to find a place like this in the middle of the city, he said casually. You run this by yourself? I do. Impressive. You don't look much older than. What, 15? Izuku didn't answer right away. Just added whipped cream with a careful swirl, then passed the drink over in a tall glass mug. 15 and a half, he said finally. Hawks whistled low. And here I thought I was an early bloomer. He took a sip and raised his eyebrows. Oh, that's dangerously good. Izuku gave a small, proud nod. Glad you like it? Hawks didn't move away. Just leaned on the counter a little. Wings shifting slightly with each breath. Place is nice. Real peaceful. Strict rules? Izuku nodded. No fighting. No discrimination. No destruction of property. Doesn't matter if you're a hero, villain, or neither. Hawks looked at him over the rim of his glass. That's bold. You ever had trouble? Izuku shrugged lightly. Not often. Not a lie. Just not the whole truth. The winged hero hummed, setting his drink down. You got guts, kid? Izuku said nothing. Hawks didn't push. Just let the silence settle, comfortable and quiet. After a moment, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a feather. Izuku blinked. Here, Hawks said, handing it to him. For luck, or decoration, or marketing. Izuku hesitated, then accepted it carefully. Thanks. No problem. He stretched, flexing his wings. Might drop in again sometime. Gotta keep an eye on the good spots, you know? You're welcome anytime. Hawks gave a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. That's a dangerous thing to say to a guy like me. And with that, he turned, heading toward the door. Just before he stepped out, he glanced over his shoulder. Take care, Midoriya. Izuku stiffened. He hadn't told him his name. But Hawks was already gone, red feathers catching the wind like sparks. Izuku looked down at the feather in his hand. Maybe it was for luck. Or maybe it was a warning. Either way, it was his now. The morning rush had faded into a soft hum of background music and gentle clinks of mugs and spoons. Izuku was wiping down the counter, content in the lull. He liked the calm. The way the cafe breathed with him. Safe, predictable. Which, of course, meant that calm was about to get obliterated. Slam. The door flew open like it owed someone money, and in stormed Katsuki Bakugo school uniform, jacket half-buttoned, scowl already in place, and muttering explosive curses under his breath. Izuku didn't even blink. Good morning, Kaken. Katsuki grunted. Shut up. Now. You're extra cranky today, Izuku said, already grabbing a mug. Rough morning? You mean every morning? I'm surrounded by idiots. He dropped into his usual spot at the bar with a thud and slumped dramatically onto the counter. Izuku raised an eyebrow. Did Mineta try to talk to someone again? No. Worse. Katsuki growled. Ashido's got some new group project idea for team building, and it involves karaoke. Karaoke, that. In front of the whole DMN class. Izuku smiled to himself. I think you do great. You have a very powerful voice. I swear to God. And what's the rest of the class saying? They're all into it. Even Sparky. Like we've got time for this crap. Katsuki huffed and stared at the steam rising from his mug. They're all just extras. Running around like this is some slice of life anime. Izuku blinked slowly. Technically, this scene is kinda giving slice of life, you know. Katsuki's glare could have melted a steel beam. You're lucky this coffee is good, he muttered. Izuku passed over a warm pastry just because. On the house. Teeth charity case. You stormed in like a tired dragon. You clearly needed a cinnamon roll. Katsuki didn't respond immediately, but he took the pastry. He always took the pastry. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence. Katsuki tapped a rhythm against his mug while Izuku checked on the simmering caramel. Then softly, Hey, you ever get bored of this? Izuku paused. Of the cafe? Katsuki didn't look at him. Yeah. Doing this every day. Same stuff. No explosions. No action. Izuku thought for a moment. No. I think I did enough exploding when I was younger. Katsuki finally looked up. There was a weird flicker in his eyes like he wanted to ask something, but didn't know how. Instead, he just said, You're weird. Izuku smiled. You've said that every time you come here. Because it's true. Katsuki pushed the empty mug forward. More coffee. And don't skimp on the sugar. Yes, Kaken. And shut up. The Greenlit Café was closed. It was a rare sight, almost shocking to the regulars. A few had stopped. Short outside the shop that morning, blinking at the handwritten sign taped to the glass door. Closed for the day, back tomorrow. Simple. Polite. Personal. Inside, everything was already spotless and still. The counters gleamed. The chairs were tucked in. The tiny whiteboard still had the last featured drink scrawled in green marker, Midoriya's maple matcha, limited time. Izuku stood on the sidewalk across the street, hands in his pockets. It felt weird not going in. Like he'd forgotten something, an entire part of himself left behind. But he needed this. So he turned his back on the building he loved and walked into the city. His first stop was the bakery 3 blocks away. An older woman ran it, her glasses always a little askew and flour dusted in her curly gray hair like snow. He didn't come often. Running his own cafe meant he didn't usually buy baked goods, but she greeted him like an old friend. Well, look who's free from his kingdom for once. Izuku smiled shyly. Hi, Ms. Hoshino. Just taking a break today. Good. You work too hard for someone your age. Sit down. I'm making you something sweet. He ended up with a warm chocolate croissant and a cup of tea he didn't order but somehow needed. He sat at a corner table by the window, watching people rush by outside. Ms. Hoshino didn't charge him. You've got kind eyes, she said simply, waving off his wallet. Reminds me of my son. He was a hero once. Came home one day and opened a music store instead. Izuku's throat tightened a little, but he just bowed and thanked her. After that, he let the city guide him. He walked without destination, stopping when something caught his eye. A street performer playing a violin with cork-powered illusions of butterflies. A second-hand bookstore tucked in a basement. A tiny cat perched on a mailbox, sunning itself like royalty. Izuku found himself smiling. More than once, someone recognized him. Not as the Quirkless kid from middle school, or Deku, or a would-be hero, but as the barista from that peaceful little cafe near the edge of the commercial district. Hey, you're the guy from the Greenlit Café, right? Those lemon scones changed my life, man. You still do that cinnamon honey latte? My roommate talks about it like it's a religion. He laughed, blushed, thanked them all. One little girl even offered him a crayon drawing of the cafe with "Best place ever" scrawled in pink marker. Izuku folded it carefully and put it in his hoodie pocket. By early afternoon, he ended up in a local park. Not the big touristy one with fountains and fountains of children screaming joyfully. A quieter one, with a duck pond, benches, and too many squirrels. He settled on a wooden bench near the water, half hidden under a tree. Just as he took a deep breath and closed his eyes. I thought you didn't know how to sit still. Izuku blinked his eyes open. Katsuki Bakugo stood a few feet away, hands jammed into his pants pockets, brows furrowed with what might have been concern in disguise. Kaken? Izuku blinked. What are you doing here? Lunch run, Bakugo muttered. Then I saw your frizzy head through a tree. Izuku gave a small laugh. That's not exactly subtle. You'd be surprised how often it works. Bakugo came closer, hesitating only slightly before flopping down onto the bench beside him. For a while, they sat in silence, the way only old childhood friends could. You really closed the place today? Bakugo asked, voice low. Yeah, Izuku said. Thought it was time. Been a while since I've had a day. Katsuki made a noise in his throat like an annoyed scoff, but he didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled something out, a paper bag, slightly warm. Here. Izuku blinked. What's this? Taiyaki, Bakugo muttered, not meeting his eyes. From that place you like. Izuku's chest squeezed. Kaken. Thank you. Shut up, Katsuki said gruffly. Just eat it. Izuku took a bite. It was warm and sweet, and he realized he hadn't stopped smiling for most of the day. Later, Bakugo left for a group training session, muttering something about extras and their coordination problems. Izuku stayed behind in the park a little longer, sketching drink ideas in a tiny notepad he kept in his pocket. A voice startled him mid-sketch. Mind if I sit? He looked up and saw Hyu Azui, holding a small bento box and wearing her casual hoodie instead of her school uniform. Oh, sure, go ahead, Izuku said quickly. Tsuyu sat quietly, then offered him a rice ball from her lunch. You looked like you could use a snack, she said. I actually just had taiyaki. I brought extras. Izuku laughed softly and accepted. Thank you. She nodded. They ate together in calm silence, The kind that didn't need to be filled. Your kind, she said suddenly. Izuku blinked. Huh. You didn't ask why I was here. Or what I'm doing outside school. Or talk just to fill the air. Oh, sorry. I like that, she finished, interrupting softly. Izuku flushed a little. Oh. So you finished her bento. Your cafe is nice. It feels safe there. He felt that again, that swell of something deep in his chest. That's all I want it to be. She stood. Then you're doing a good job. And with a small wave, she left. The sun dipped low by the time Izuku wandered back toward home. He passed the market again, waved to Ms. Hoshino who was sweeping outside, and detoured past a florist just because the window display made him smile. The streetlights flickered on, one by one. He found himself standing behind the cafe before he even realized it. The back alley was quiet, a little breezy. No cars, no customers. Just the back door, the recycling bin, and the familiar outline of the building that meant safety. He didn't go inside. He just looked up. He didn't know why. Some instinct. Some twinge of awareness. And there, on the roof, a figure. Wings tucked behind his back, catching the last bits of golden light like fire. Pucks. The pro-hero stood still, arms folded, his gaze directed toward the cafe, no, toward Izuku. Watching. Neutral. Unreadable. Izuku didn't move. Hawks tilted his head just slightly in greeting. And then, with a barely audible flutter of feathers, he vanished over the roofline. Izuku stepped forward slowly and found something small fluttering at the back entrance. A single red feather. He bent down, picked it up gently. It was warm in his hands, almost like it held a heartbeat of its own. His mind spun. Was this a warning? A thank you? Check-in? He didn't know. But something about it made his pulse slow instead of spike. He tucked the feather into the pocket of his hoodie, next to the crayon drawing from earlier. When he finally entered the cafe, he didn't turn on the lights. He just stood in the dark for a moment, breathing in the scent of wood polish and honeyed coffee. His sanctuary. His cafe. His home. The rain had come and gone that morning, leaving the streets of Mizudafu washed and glistening under a pale afternoon sun. The clouds had thinned out just enough to let light trickle through the windows of the Greenlit Café, soft and golden across the counters and tabletops. Izuku was behind the counter, a pale green apron tied around his waist and a pencil tucked behind one ear. The scent of fresh cinnamon rolls lingered faintly in the air, mingling with the smooth hum of the cafe's old record player spinning a mellow jazz track. A few regulars dotted the room, a pair of college students whispering over notebooks in the corner, a quiet office worker nursing an espresso and reading a paperback. It was calm. And then the door opened with a soft chime. Izuku didn't look up right away. He was mid-pour, focused on filling a takeout cup without spilling any foam. "Welcome to the Greenlit Café," he called out gently, his usual line. "You can take a seat anywhere, I'll be with you in." Turned. His voice caught somewhere in his throat. Skinny All Might stood just inside the doorway. Not the towering figure from billboards and commercials, but the real one. Worn thin, drawn around the edges, wrapped in a long coat with the collar turned up. His cheeks were a little hollow, eyes tired, and his once proud hair was pulled back into a low, neat ponytail. He wasn't trying to draw attention. Sunglasses hung loosely from one hand. For a moment, neither of them said a word. Izuku's heart did something strange in his chest. Not panic. Not joy. But a quiet twist, like something old turning over beneath his ribs. All Might looked around the cafe slowly, like he was seeing a ghost. "This place yours?" he asked finally, his voice just barely above a whisper. Izuku nodded once. "Yeah." All Might gave a faint, dry smile. "I thought I recognized the name. Greenlit." A beat passed. "You remembered?" Izuku asked, and it came out more surprised than anything. He hadn't expected that. Hadn't expected him at all. "I don't forget many things, Midoriya." Izuku flinched at the name. Not because it hurt, but because it sounded so distant now, like a title that didn't fit anymore. He cleared his throat and gestured to the bar seats. "You can sit if you want. I'll get you something warm." All Might sat carefully, like he wasn't used to stillness. "Surprise me." Izuku went to work. It gave him something to do with his hands. He didn't know what to say. This was the man who shattered his childhood dream in a single sentence. The man he had idolized, cried over, chased through city streets. And now, he was just another customer. Izuku made a honey black tea with milk and a slice of lemon, gentle, comforting. He slid the cup forward without ceremony. All Might took it with both hands. "You've grown," he said softly. "You were just a kid when we last talked." Izuku gave a quiet chuckle, not bitter. "Yeah, I guess I had to." The silence stretched again. Not hostile. "But careful. You didn't go to you, All Might said slowly, like he wasn't sure if he should bring it up. Izuku shook his head. Didn't see the point after that conversation. All Might's shoulders slumped slightly. Izuku didn't press. He didn't need to. He wasn't angry, not anymore. He had made peace with the path he'd taken. The cafe was his. His work. His dream. And no one, not even All Might, could take that from him. I didn't come here to rehash that," All Might murmured, fingers tightening slightly around the cup. "I heard about this cafe through the grapevine. Pro and villain friendly. No fighting. Just peace. That's the goal," Izuku said. "No costumes. No quirks. Just people." A quiet nod. All Might sipped the tea. His lips twitched in mild surprise. "This is really good." Izuku smiled faintly. "Thanks." For a while, they just existed in the same space, two people who had once meant the world to each other in different ways. The sound of the record player filled the gaps. Outside, the street was busy with life, but in here, time felt slower. Eventually, All Might spoke again. "You've made something good here. Something real." Izuku didn't look up from where he was wiping down the counter. "I'm trying." "You succeeded." They didn't speak again after that. All Might finished his tea in slow sips, stood quietly, and placed a few crisp bills under the empty cup. He didn't linger, didn't say goodbye. Just nodded once, an old soldier's salute, and slipped out into the street. Izuku stood still behind the counter for a while. He didn't know how to feel. But he didn't feel broken. That had to mean something. Later that night, the cafe was dark, closed for the evening. The wind rustled gently through the alley beside the building, brushing past the rooftop like fingers through hair. Perched on a nearby ledge, a single feather, red and light as breath, quivered in the breeze. It shifted, twitched once, and listened. Morning broke slow, gray, and quiet. The kind of day that felt suspended in time, neither warm nor cold, neither sunny nor rainy. Just still. Izuku opened the cafe like usual. He unlocked the door with practiced ease, flipping the closed sign to open with a soft click. The scent of roasted beans and vanilla hung in the air from the prep the night before. He walked through the space like always, flicking on the lights, adjusting chairs, setting trays into the pastry case. Everything was normal. But something in the atmosphere wasn't. The cafe felt. He paused by the espresso machine, fingers tightening around the portafilter. His eyes drifted toward the front windows, where the overcast sky glared dully through the glass. Nothing there. He shook the feeling off. It wasn't unusual to feel off now and then. Maybe he was just tired. He'd stayed up late sketching menu ideas, and he hadn't really eaten properly that morning. Still, the feeling lingered like steam that refused to dissipate. By 8:15 a.m., the first few regulars came in. Mrs. Kondo, who always asked for her tea just barely hot. A teenager in his hero school uniform, clearly not UA, but enthusiastic all the same. A salaryman who never said a word, just nodded gratefully and typed away at his laptop. Izuku wore his usual smile, his apron tied neatly around his waist, and served them all with practiced grace. He was wiping down the counter when it happened. A movement in the corner of his eye, barely a flicker. He glanced up, half expecting to see someone standing at the door, but there was no one there. Instead, it was something else. A single crimson feather rested near the far end of the window bench. At first, it looked like decoration, too clean, too sharp. But Izuku knew birds didn't leave feathers like that. Not that color. Not that size. And definitely not tucked into the crease of a windowsill like it had been placed there. He slowly approached it, dried cloth still in hand. He stared at the feather. His fingers hovered above it before he finally picked it up. It was weightless. Warm to the touch. Too warm. He turned it over once, then again, then glanced around the shop. No one noticed. Everyone was chatting, sipping their drinks, minding their business. But his heart was beating faster. He knew about Hawks. Of course he did. Everyone knew Japan's #2 hero. But he also remembered something small, something he'd read once in a quiet corner of the internet. Hawks could see through his feathers. Hear through them. Feel vibrations. Monitor. Izuku swallowed and gently slipped the feather into his apron pocket. He didn't panic. Didn't even flinch. But now he knew. He was being watched. Not maliciously. Not violently. But purposefully. And he had no idea why. The rest of the day passed with a thread of tension pulled taut just beneath the surface. Izuku kept smiling, kept making drinks and taking orders, but his eyes darted toward reflective surfaces more often. He watched shadows outside the windows. Rooftops. Nothing appeared out of place. But every so often, he'd swear the air shifted like a presence brushed past the cafe, just close enough to notice, but far enough not to see. When evening came and the last customer waved goodbye, Izuku stood alone in the quiet shop, back against the counter, staring at the feather in his palm. Why would a pro hero keep an eye on him? What was Hawks looking for? Was he here for protection? Or suspicion? The lights buzzed faintly overhead. Izuku sighed and tucked the feather away again. He moved through the end-of-day tasks slower than usual, wiping down tables, sweeping, resetting the display case. Outside, the city was already dimming. Streetlights blinked on in staggered rhythm. He'd just turned the cafe's sign to closed when the bell above the door rang. Izuku's head snapped up. Someone stepped inside, despite the sign. Familiar. A flash of patchwork skin and a bored, slow blink. "Yo," Dabi said, stepping inside like he hadn't just ignored the closed sign completely. Izuku didn't move. "I was about to lock up," he said evenly. Dabi's eyes drifted over the interior, unbothered. "Saw the light still on. Thought I'd drop by. You always keep it this warm in here?" Izuku crossed his arms. "It's a cafe, not a freezer." Dabi huffed a quiet laugh. "Fair." He made no move to sit. Just stood near the doorway, the shadows from outside casting strange shapes across his jaw. Izuku tilted his head slightly. "You planning to order something?" "Yeah." Dabi finally moved, slow and casual, toward the counter. "You still got that stupid cinnamon tea?" "You mean the one you said tasted like hot dirt?" Izuku asked. The pause. "That's the one." Izuku turned to make it without another word. Despite everything, despite the tension still humming in his bones from the feather earlier, his hands moved with practiced ease. "Hot water. Infuser. A touch of honey. Rough day?" he asked without turning. Dabi snorted. "You could say that. Villain work tiring?" "Everything's tiring." Izuku placed the tea on the counter. Dabi didn't pick it up right away. He just stared at the steam curling from the mug. "Place smells like peace," he muttered. Izuku blinked. "What?" "This place," Dabi said again, voice quieter now. "Smells like peace. Like it shouldn't exist." Izuku wasn't sure how to respond to that. He watched as Dabi finally lifted the mug, the steam kissing his stitched jaw. They didn't speak for a minute. Then Dabi glanced up, pale blue eyes unreadable. "You ever get the feeling you're being watched, Midoriya?" Izuku's heart jolted. He gripped the counter slightly tighter. "Yes," he said slowly. Dabi smirked just a flicker. "Maybe it's nothing. Or maybe it wasn't." Izuku didn't reply. He just watched as Dabi took a long sip of tea, sighing like he hadn't tasted warmth in years. For the first time that day, Izuku felt colder than the air around him. Outside, a feather fluttered down from the rooftop and landed silently in the alley. The soft hum of the espresso machine filled the morning air of the Greenlit Café. Light filtered through the front windows in golden S, casting a warm glow over the polished counters and neatly arranged tables. The smell of coffee beans, fresh pastries, and subtle hints of vanilla wafted through the space, weaving a comforting, familiar atmosphere. Izuku Midoriya stood behind the counter, dressed in his usual forest green apron over a black t-shirt, hair slightly tousled from the early rise. His eyes were clear, calm, content. He wiped down a few mugs with a cloth, humming a little under his breath to the quiet tune playing from the small speaker near the register. It had been a steady morning. A couple of regulars had come in, an older woman who always ordered chamomile tea and sat by the window with her book, and a construction worker who liked his coffee black and his bagels plain. There were no big hero cameos, no villains lurking in shadows. Just the gentle rhythm of daily life. Katsuki had dropped by an hour ago, grumbling about the new group project Aizawa-sensei had assigned. "They're all extras, I swear," he snapped, sliding into the stool at the bar. "One of them said we should do a musical presentation." "A musical, Deku?" Izuku laughed behind his hand. "Well, Kaken, I'd pay to see that." Katsuki made a noise like he was about to combust, but it was followed by the tiniest twitch of a smirk. He didn't stay long. Just grabbed a spicy miso bun, a drink, and muttered something about needing to survive this hell before heading back out. Izuku watched him go with a fond smile. Moments like that felt normal. And normal was precious. Midday brought in a handful of new faces, a couple of office workers, and even a pair of high school girls who squealed when they realized the cafe had been trending online. "But, God, this is it. The one with the peaceful vibe rule list," one of them whispered loudly. Izuku chuckled politely and took their orders. 2 iced matcha lattes and a chocolate croissant to share, right? They giggled. "You're like the sweetest barista ever." "Thank you. I try my best." He didn't mind the compliments, but he never let them sink too deep. They were for the cafe, not him. Not really. As the afternoon waned and the soft blue tones of early evening began creeping in, the customers dwindled. A few lingered with laptops, typing away quietly, while others trickled out with murmured thanks and full stomachs. Izuku busied himself cleaning up behind the counter, refilling napkin holders, wiping down the display case, and noting what needed restocking. The cafe closed at 7 today. Sundays were always quieter. At 6:50 p.m., the bell above the door jingled one last time. Izuku glanced up, half expecting someone running late. It was no one familiar, just a man in a trench coat who glanced around briefly, realized the cafe was about to close, and gave a polite nod before leaving again. Once the door clicked shut behind him, Izuku locked it, flipped the sign to closed, and let out a soft sigh. He stood in the middle of the shop for a moment, letting the silence settle in. The stillness of the empty cafe was something he'd grown to love. It was like the walls themselves breathed in sync with him. "All right," he muttered to himself, stretching his arms over his head. "Time to do a little shopping." He headed upstairs to his small apartment above the cafe, simple, clean, and just cozy enough. He changed into a dark green hoodie, pulled up the hood, and slid his wallet into his pocket. The nearest late-night convenience store was about a 15-minute walk. Not too bad. He needed milk, eggs, and some extra matcha powder. Maybe some fresh fruit if they had any. The moment he stepped outside, a heavy wind tugged at his hood. He looked up. The clouds had rolled in without him noticing, and the sky was a shade darker than it should have been. "Please don't rain yet," he whispered. It rained. 5 minutes into his walk, a sudden downpour drenched the street like the sky had opened a floodgate. Izuku yelped and ducked under a tree, already soaked. Of course. Still he pressed on. He wasn't going to let a little rain stop him. He'd weathered worse. By the time he reached the store, he was dripping. The cashier gave him a pitiful smile, but didn't say anything. Izuku grabbed what he needed quickly and made his way back with his paper bag tucked inside his hoodie. 15 minutes. It felt like an hour. His shoes squelched with each step as he finally unlocked the door to the cafe and stepped inside. Water pooled on the welcome mat behind him as he shut the door, locking it again. "Great," he muttered, shivering slightly. He kicked off his soaked shoes and padded into the kitchen. The bag was damp but not ruined. He began to unpack quietly, stocking the fridge and the pantry. Eggs on the second shelf. Milk in the door. Matcha powder into the tin. Each motion was rhythmic, grounding. Familiar. Once everything was put away, he grabbed a towel from the back room, dried off his hair as best he could, and trudged up the stairs. His socks left wet footprints on the wooden floor. A hot shower was the reward. The steam filled the bathroom quickly, and the heat chased away the chill in his bones. He stood under the water for a while, letting it wash away the ache in his shoulders, the cold in his fingers, the weight of the quiet night. When he finally stepped out, changed into dry clothes, and crawled into bed, the clock read 9:27 p.m. Just as he was drifting off, a feather barely visible in the corner of the room shifted in the faint breeze from the window. Unseen. Silent. Watching. Outside, on a rooftop across the street, a pair of golden eyes watched the darkened cafe windows. A small smile tugged at the corner of the pro-hero's lips. "So, that's how you spend your night off," Hawks murmured to himself. "Interesting." One feather fluttered softly back toward his coat. He didn't move. Didn't need to. Just observed. And waited. Because something about that cafe, about the quiet, kind-eyed boy running it, kept pulling his attention back. Even if he didn't understand why. Not yet. But he would. So, the morning light streamed through the cafe windows, warm and welcoming. The usual sounds of the city filtered in from outside, but within the Greenlit Café, all was still and calm. Izuku's alarm clock went off, its usual beep echoing in the quiet space. His hand reached out automatically, silencing it with practiced ease. However, this morning felt different. His body didn't want to get up, and his eyes were heavy. There was a dull ache in his head and a tightness in his chest, as if the cold from the night before had taken hold of him, but he pushed those thoughts aside. It wasn't the first time he'd woken up feeling a little off. With a groan, Izuku dragged himself out of bed, though his legs felt unsteady. He wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion from the previous day or something else, but he wasn't going to let it stop him. The Greenlit Café was his responsibility now, and he couldn't afford to slack off. He shuffled to the bathroom, splashing water on his face and brushing his teeth, trying to shake off the fogginess. Even as he looked at his reflection in the mirror, he could tell something wasn't quite right. His skin had a pallor to it, and his hair was messier than usual. His tired eyes stared back at him. He should have gotten more sleep. But there was no time to dwell on it. He was already running a bit late. The cafe needed to open by 7 a.m., and he was already 30 minutes behind. Izuku took a deep breath, pulling on his usual cafe attire, a green apron over his simple black t-shirt, and hurried downstairs. As he stepped into the cafe, the familiar scent of fresh coffee beans and pastries filled the air. It was a comforting smell, one that always made him feel grounded. But today, it didn't seem to help as much as it usually did. He started his morning routine, sweeping and mopping the floors, restocking the pastries, and making sure everything was ready for the opening. His movements were slower than normal, his body feeling heavy as he worked. Each task seemed to take twice as long as it should have, but he kept pushing through, refusing to let his exhaustion show. By the time the clock struck 7 o'clock, the cafe was spotless and ready for customers. Izuku, however, still felt off. He hadn't been able to shake the fogginess in his head, and his muscles were sore, as though he'd run a marathon. But the cafe was open now, and he needed to focus. He would deal with his fatigue later. The first few customers trickled in, and Izuku did his best to greet them warmly. "Good morning, welcome to the Greenlit Café," he said with a tired smile. His voice sounded hoarser than usual, but he hoped no one noticed. The first hour of business went by without incident. Izuku worked slowly but steadily, serving drinks and snacks, making small talk with regulars. But as the morning wore on, the sense of unease in his body didn't fade. It felt as though his head was floating just above his body, disconnected from his movements. Even the slightest tasks, like brewing coffee or preparing pastries, felt harder than usual. His hands were shaky, and his chest tightened whenever he tried to take a deep breath. He could tell he wasn't at his best, but he couldn't let himself collapse now. There were still customers to serve, still work to do. It wasn't until around noon, just as the lunch rush began to die down, that the sickness finally hit him hard. Izuku was walking toward the counter, carrying a tray of drinks, when a wave of dizziness struck. His vision blurred for a moment, and his legs wobbled beneath him. He gripped the counter to steady himself, but a deep, nauseating wave of fatigue swept over him. His head throbbed, and a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He had to stop. His stomach turned violently, and he quickly set the tray down before stumbling into the back of the cafe. His breath was shallow as he leaned against the wall, his chest tight. This wasn't good. Izuku closed his eyes, trying to steady himself, but it felt like everything around him was spinning. He took a few deep breaths, but it didn't seem to help. His body was betraying him, and there was nothing he could do about it now. He leaned against the counter, clutching it for support, but he couldn't seem to gather the strength to continue. That's when the door to the cafe opened, and a familiar voice broke through his foggy haze. "Hey, Izuku!" Hitoshi Shinsu's voice called from the entrance. Izuku blinked, trying to focus on the familiar face of his friend. Shinso had been coming into the cafe every now and then since he'd first visited, but today, something about him felt different. Maybe it was the way Shinsu's expression shifted as he took in the sight of Izuku struggling to stay on his feet. "Shinso!" Izuku greeted weakly, forcing a smile as he straightened up. "Hey, what can I get you today?" Shinso didn't respond immediately. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning Izuku's flushed face with a scrutinizing gaze. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice tinged with concern. "I'm fine," Izuku lied, his voice a little too soft to convince anyone. He tried to steady his breathing, but his body refused to cooperate. Shinso raised an eyebrow. "You don't look fine, Izuku. You're pale." Izuku shrugged it off, though it took more effort than it should have. "Really, I'm okay," he repeated, forcing a smile. "Just tired, that's all." Shinso wasn't convinced. He didn't say anything. He just made his way to the counter and ordered his usual hot chocolate and a cinnamon roll. Izuku moved slowly to prepare it, his hands trembling slightly as he grabbed the mug and began to pour. But as he made his way to Shinsu's table with the order, it hit him again this time, much worse. The dizziness returned, stronger than before. His vision blurred once again, and this time, his legs didn't hold up. The tray slipped from his hands, and before he could catch himself, he collapsed to the floor. Everything went black. "Izuku!" Shinsu's voice snapped him back to reality, though it sounded far away. He tried to open his eyes, but his body refused to cooperate. His head was spinning, and his stomach churned. Shinso knelt beside him, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. Izuku's body felt like dead weight in his arms as he gently helped him sit up. "Izuku in it," Shinso muttered, rubbing a hand over his face. "What the hell's going on with you?" Izuku could barely hear him, his vision swimming. He tried to speak, but no words came out. His temperature was rising rapidly, and he could feel the heat radiating off him like an oven. The few customers in the cafe were staring at them, their concern palpable. Shinso glanced around and stood up abruptly, addressing them. "You all need to leave," he said firmly. "This place is closed for the day." There was no argument. One by one, the customers filed out, murmuring under their breath. They didn't need to be told twice. As the door shut behind the last customer, Shinso locked it and moved to Izuku's side again, his face tight with worry. He crouched down and checked Izuku's forehead. His temperature was burning hot now, feverish. Shinso couldn't stand seeing his friend like this. He was too stubborn to admit he needed help, and now it was clear just how bad he'd been feeling all morning. He quickly scooped Izuku into his arms, lifting him with surprising ease despite his lanky frame. "I'm taking you upstairs," he muttered. "You need to rest. Don't fight me on this." Izuku was too exhausted to protest, and he let Shinso carry him up the stairs to the apartment. The room was quiet and dimly lit, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. Shinso gently laid Izuku down on the bed, pulling the blankets over him. He then hurried downstairs to grab some water and a thermometer. He had to make sure Izuku was going to be okay. As Shinso checked his temperature again and wiped his forehead with a cool cloth, he couldn't help but think how reckless Izuku was. How he tried to keep the cafe running despite being sick. He was always so determined to keep things going, even when it wasn't good for him. Shinso sighed, his fingers brushing through Izuku's hair gently. "Rest, Izuku. I've got you now." The cafe would have to wait. For now, Izuku needed to focus on getting better. And Shinso wasn't going anywhere. The apartment above the Greenlit Café was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of blankets and the soft hum of the refrigerator. The usual sounds of the city cars, people talking, the general bustle of life seemed a world away, muffled behind the thick walls of the cafe's upstairs quarters. Hitoshi Shinso had never been in the cafe apartment before. He hadn't even imagined he'd end up here, much less have to take care of Izuku while he was sick. But here he was, sitting at the edge of the bed, keeping an eye on the sick cafe owner who had practically collapsed in his arms just hours ago. Shinso wasn't sure what had happened. He'd been visiting the cafe like he usually did, chatting with Izuku, ordering his regular hot chocolate, when suddenly the cheerful young man had just fallen. One moment he was smiling, the next, he was unconscious on the floor. The sight had sent a cold shiver through Shinso. He'd never seen Izuku look so vulnerable before. The normally energetic, determined man who ran the cafe had been reduced to someone who needed help just to sit up, someone who couldn't even take care of himself anymore. And for some reason, it made something tighten in Shinso's chest. He glanced at Izuku now, who lay in the bed, curled beneath the covers. The pale green color of his face had given way to a flushed red hue as his fever seemed to rise and fall with the passing hours. He was still unconscious, his breath shallow but steady. But even in sleep, Izuku's presence was overwhelming. His heart seemed to radiate warmth, as if the very air around him was infused with a quiet energy. Shinso hadn't expected to find himself in this situation. He had never imagined taking care of someone else, let alone someone as stubborn and independent as Izuku. He wasn't exactly the nurturing type he'd learned to keep to himself over the years, relying on his own skills and instincts. But seeing Izuku like this? It was different. He reached over and gently adjusted the blanket, making sure Izuku was comfortable. Izuku didn't stir, but the faint smile on his lips, even in sleep, made Shinso's chest tighten a little. Izuku always smiled like that, genuine, soft, a little awkward, but always there. It was like he had an endless reservoir of warmth that he could pour into anyone around him. And yet, he never took time for himself. Never admitted when he was struggling. Shinso sighed, brushing a stray lock of hair off of Izuku's forehead. He had never really known Izuku outside of their cafe exchanges. He was a regular, someone Shinso saw every few days, someone who was always there with a friendly smile, ready to listen, ready to serve. He'd never imagined the kind of depth Izuku carried within him. Now that Izuku was in this state, Shinso felt a sense of protectiveness stir in him, one that he couldn't quite shake. It was strange. He didn't know why it affected him like this. But seeing Izuku, who was so selfless and kind, struggling sick, he couldn't just leave him to deal with it on his own. He knew he had to be there. The rest of the day passed in a blur of mundane tasks, bringing Izuku water, checking his temperature, making sure he had enough blankets, and occasionally wiping the sweat off his brow. It felt like a routine, though not one that Shinso had ever thought he'd be following. The idea of taking care of someone else had never really occurred to him. But now, as he sat by Izuku's bedside, listening to the soft sounds of his breathing, he couldn't imagine doing anything else. As the afternoon stretched on, the fever didn't seem to improve much, though it didn't get worse either. Izuku's condition remained stable, but his body was clearly exhausted. Shinso stayed close, watching over him as best as he could. It was just before sunset when Izuku finally stirred. His eyes fluttered open, his vision blurry for a moment as he tried to make sense of the room around him. The first thing he saw was Shinso's worried face, his brow furrowed in concern as he sat by the bedside. "Shinso?" Izuku mumbled weakly, his voice hoarse. What happened?" "You passed out," Shinso replied quietly, his voice almost soft as he reached for a glass of water. "You've been running a fever all day." Izuku's tired green eyes met Shinso's, and for a moment, there was a lingering silence between them. Izuku looked like he was about to say something, but the words didn't come. He took the water Shinso offered him, slowly sipping it as he tried to gather his thoughts. "He didn't mean to worry you," Izuku finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Shinso gave a small, lopsided smile. "You didn't worry me." His tone was light, but there was something deeper behind it. It's just, I'm not used to seeing you like this. Izuku swallowed the water, his hand trembling just slightly. I didn't want to make you feel like you had to stay. He lowered his gaze, his cheeks flushed with a hint of embarrassment. You didn't have to do all this for me. Shinsu's eyes softened, and he leaned forward slightly. Izuku, don't be ridiculous. You passed out in front of me. I wasn't just going to leave you alone. Izuku blinked at him, confusion written all over his face. But you don't even know me that well. I mean, we've only talked a few times. Shinso chuckled softly, the sound low and warm. Yeah, but that's the thing. I've been coming here for months now. We talked. I've seen you at your best, and I've seen you push yourself beyond your limits. So yeah, I care. He paused for a moment, almost as if unsure whether to continue. You may not realize it, but you've got this way of getting under people's skin, you know? Izuku's cheeks reddened even more, but he didn't pull away. He simply looked at Shinso, his eyes wide and a little uncertain. It was rare for him to let someone in like this, to open up to someone who wasn't already part of his inner circle. But for some reason with Shinso, it felt easy. It felt natural. I'm sorry for worrying you, Izuku mumbled again, but there was a warmth in his voice now, one that wasn't just from the fever. I really don't know what I would have done without you here. Shinso smiled softly, his eyes locking with Izuku's. No need to apologize. Just get better, okay? Izuku nodded, a faint smile pulling at the corners of his lips. Thanks, Shinso. I really appreciate it. The two of them sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds in the room being the soft hum of the air conditioner and Izuku's occasional cough. Shinso stayed by his side, keeping an eye on him while occasionally asking if he needed anything. Izuku wasn't used to this kind of care, but it felt strangely comforting. As the night stretched on, the room grew darker, and the soft glow of the streetlights outside filtered in through the windows. Shinso stayed in the chair beside Izuku's bed, his head resting on his hand as he quietly watched Izuku doze. He'd never expected to feel this way about someone. Never expected to feel so protective, so invested. But here he was, watching over someone who had become more important to him than he'd ever thought possible. Maybe it was the way Izuku had taken care of him when he was struggling, small acts of kindness that hadn't gone unnoticed. Maybe it was the way he had always been there, steady and reliable, despite the weight he carried. But tonight, as Shinso stayed at Izuku's side, a small but undeniable feeling began to stir in his chest. He had a feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was more to their friendship than he had realized. And that, for the first time in a long while, made him feel something other than the usual detachment. Something more personal. Something more important. The next morning, the cafe was filled with the usual scent of fresh brewed coffee, the faint notes of pastries baking in the oven, and the quiet hum of conversation between early customers. The Greenlit Café had opened at its usual time, but the atmosphere today was different. Lighter. Almost as if the cafe itself was breathing a little easier. Izuku had woken up feeling like a new person. His fever was gone, and though he was still a bit tired, there was an unmistakable energy that filled him, a kind of buoyancy he hadn't felt in days. After the fever had broken, the sleep had been deep and uninterrupted, allowing him to finally get some rest. It wasn't often he could afford to take a full break, but when he had, he'd found how much his body had needed it. And now, he was ready to return to his routine. Though he still wasn't at his full energy, he was definitely feeling much better than the day before. His steps felt lighter as he moved around the cafe, preparing everything for the opening of the shop. The mopping, the sweeping, the restocking, all of it felt effortless today. For once, Izuku didn't feel the weight of the cafe pressing on him. There was no rush, no exhaustion tugging at his bones. A calm that spread like warmth through the shop. Shinso had insisted on staying with him for the morning, but after a solid 15 minutes of insisting that Izuku was fine, he had finally left the cafe. If you're sure, Shinso had said, his voice uncertain but soft. I'll come by later, okay? Izuku had smiled, a warm, grateful smile, and assured him he was perfectly fine. It had taken a little more convincing, but Shinso had left reluctantly, promising to check in later. Now, standing behind the counter, Izuku found his fingers tapping a rhythm on the countertop, his eyes scanning the customers who had already started trickling in. There was a sense of lightness in his chest, an energy that felt like it had been dormant for so long. It was almost like he was waking up for the first time in a long while. And it didn't go unnoticed. As the regulars filtered into the cafe, they all noticed it. The subtle change in the air, the shift in the energy. Izuku's usual quiet and reserved demeanor was still there, but there was a spark in his eyes, a warmth that spread through the room like a gentle wave. His smile, which had always been kind, now held a genuine radiance. He moved with ease as though he could breathe for the first time in days. He wasn't forcing anything, wasn't pushing himself too hard, and the customers could feel it. "Morning, Izuku." Mina Ashido greeted cheerfully as she entered, her usual bubbly demeanor a perfect match for the light atmosphere of the cafe. Izuku looked up, his face lighting up in response. "Good morning, Mina. How are you today?" "Great," Mina responded, sliding into a seat at the counter. "Just came to get my usual don't want to miss out on a good start to the day." Izuku chuckled and moved to prepare her order, but before he could get to it, a loud voice cut through the chatter. "Oi, de! How's the sick little hero feeling today?" Izuku's head snapped up, and there, standing at the door with a wide grin plastered across his face, was none other than Bakugo Katsuki. He strolled in confidently, his usual scowl in place, but there was something less aggressive about him today. Maybe it was the fact that Izuku was looking better, or maybe it was the way the cafe was just calm today. "Shut up, Kaken," Izuku grumbled back with a small, playful smile, though his cheeks flushed slightly from the teasing. "I'm feeling a lot better. Thanks for checking in on me yesterday." Bakugo snorted but didn't say anything more. Instead, he walked up to the counter and leaned on it, his eyes scanning the cafe like he was looking for something to criticize. But seeing Izuku so, well, it made him hesitate. "I thought you were gonna die or something with that fever," he muttered, though his voice was softer than usual. "Good thing you pulled through. Now I don't have to drag your butt out of here." Izuku chuckled, rubbing the back of his head awkwardly. "I'm fine really. You didn't have to worry about me." Bakugo gave him an unamused look, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes. Maybe it was the relief of seeing his old friend back on his feet. Maybe it was just the fact that they were talking like this. Still, Bakugo grumbled, "Whatever. Just don't get sick again. It's annoying." Izuku laughed a little louder at that, and for the first time in a while, the sound felt natural, unforced. He'd missed this. Missed them. Before Izuku could say anything else, the door jingled, and a new customer entered. The moment Izuku's gaze shifted to the door, he froze. His heart skipped a beat at the sight of the newcomer, an imposing woman with short, silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through the air itself. She wore a white, tight-fitting jumpsuit, her muscled arms crossing over her chest. Her presence filled the room like a shockwave. "Mirko!" Izuku whispered under his breath. Mirko, the pro-hero, the rabbit hero. She was someone Izuku had always admired, someone he never expected to see in his humble cafe. And now here she was, walking in with a slight swagger, her powerful frame filling the entrance. "Whoa, what the hell is Mirko doing here?" Bakugo muttered from beside Izuku, his eyes wide in surprise. Izuku quickly shook his head, trying to recover his composure. He'd been caught off guard, but he couldn't let Mirko see that. "I don't know, Kaken. Maybe she's just here for coffee." Mirko's gaze swept the room before landing on Izuku behind the counter. A grin spread across her face as she walked up, the sound of her boots echoing with each step. "Hey, kid," she greeted, her voice deep and commanding. "I've heard a lot about this place. Figured I'd check it out." Izuku felt his heart race, his palms sweating as he wiped them quickly on his apron. Really? Welcome to the Greenlit Café, Mirko. What can I get for you?" Mirko chuckled, the sound almost like a growl. "What do you recommend?" She leaned over the counter, her sharp gaze catching Izuku's a little too closely. "I've had a lot of coffee, but I'm in the mood for something different today." Izuku cleared his throat, trying to keep calm despite the pressure. Well, we have a great special today, caramel macchiato with a twist. It's one of our most popular drinks. Mirko raised an eyebrow. Sounds good. I'll take it. Izuku nodded and immediately set to work, feeling the heat in his cheeks. It was Mirko, the rabbit hero, and she was sitting right there, ordering coffee. The nerves were practically buzzing inside him, but he didn't let it show as he prepared her drink. Bakugo, on the other hand, was staring at Mirko, obviously impressed by her presence. What the hell? You actually came in here? He muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. Mirko shot him a smirk. Got a problem with it, little dynamite? Bakugo snorted but said nothing more, turning his attention back to his drink. As Izuku set the caramel macchiato down in front of Mirko, he offered her a nervous but genuine smile. Here you go. I hope you like it. Mirko grabbed the cup, inspecting it with a critical eye before taking a sip. Her eyes lit up, and for a moment, there was a look of approval on her face. Not bad, kid. You've got a decent hand for this stuff. Izuku felt a little surge of pride at the compliment. Thank you, Mirko. It means a lot coming from you. Mirko chuckled, leaning back in her seat. You've got a good cafe here. Don't let it go to waste. The conversation settled into a comfortable rhythm, with Mirko chatting about the cafe's drink offerings, Bakugo's occasional grumbling in the background, and Izuku doing his best to keep the energy up in the shop. For once, the cafe felt alive in a way it hadn't in a long time. As the door to the cafe swung open and the last of the morning customers filed in, Izuku couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. He had made it through the tough days, and now, with Mirko's visit and the light, easy energy of the cafe, it felt like everything was finally falling into place again. Even as a familiar feather brushed against the window outside, carrying an unseen presence, Izuku smiled, unaware of the silent watchers around him. Today was a good day. The cafe was busy, the usual flow of customers coming and going. It was a warm afternoon, the air heavy with the soft hum of conversation and the clinking of coffee cups. Izuku moved behind the counter, his usual smile in place as he greeted familiar faces and took orders. Shinso had come by earlier that morning and was sitting near the window, nursing his coffee in peace. The peaceful rhythm of the cafe made it feel like the world outside didn't exist. But today, there was an undercurrent, a subtle shift in the air. It was like something was brewing in the background, waiting to come to the surface. Izuku hadn't noticed it at first, too caught up in the mundane tasks of keeping the cafe running smoothly. He'd been working for hours, making sure the customers were satisfied, making small talk with regulars, and running his usual routine without a hitch. But somewhere, deep inside, a small, nagging feeling was creeping up his spine. It was the kind of feeling you get when you know something's off, but can't quite put your finger on it. It wasn't until a sudden, familiar voice cut through the air that Izuku snapped out of his thoughts. Oh well, if it isn't little Midoriya. Izuku froze. The voice was unmistakable. His body tensed, his breath hitching in his throat. He hadn't heard that voice in years. It was a voice he had desperately tried to forget. Turning slowly, Izuku's heart raced. The door had opened, and standing there in the doorway, looking like he had just walked out of Izuku's nightmares, was his father. Izuku's father Hisashi Midoriya stood in the doorway, a smug look on his face, like he had never left. Hisashi was tall, wearing a slick, dark coat and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The same cold eyes that had haunted Izuku for so long. It had been years since he'd seen the man. Since he'd left when Izuku was 13. Hisashi had never been a part of his life too focused on his own work, on his own career, to care about his family. Izuku's heart pounded, his thoughts a jumbled mess. The last time he had seen his father, he had been a shell of a person afraid, broken. It had taken everything in him to leave the past behind when his mother passed away. But now, standing in front of him, was the man who had abandoned him. The man who had made his childhood a nightmare. What do you want? Izuku managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Hisashi's lips curled into a smirk, and he took a slow step inside. I've been hearing some things about you, son. About this little cafe of yours. Hisashi's eyes flicked around the room, his gaze lingering for a moment before returning to Izuku. Looks like you've done well for yourself. running a cafe all on your own. Quite the turnaround from the kid who couldn't do anything without help. Izuku's blood ran cold. He didn't want to entertain this conversation. He didn't want to hear his father's voice again. But the words stuck in his throat. The anger, the resentment, it was all building up inside of him. And yet there was something else too. A strange ache. The kind of ache you feel when you haven't been seen or acknowledged by the person who should have been there for you. But he didn't need that now. He didn't need him. "What are you doing here?" Izuku repeated, his tone more steady this time, though the tremor in his voice was unmistakable. Hisashi seemed to notice the tension in Izuku's body, the way he was gripping the counter. He chuckled darkly. "I was in the area and thought I'd check in. You know, see how my son's doing. After all, it's not every day I get to see you, huh?" Izuku couldn't help but flinch at the word, son. It sounded hollow, empty, coming from him. Hisashi had never been a father, not really. Not the kind of father Izuku had needed. "Leave," Izuku said, his voice much sharper now. "You're not welcome here." Hisashi raised an eyebrow, his smirk never fading. No need to be rude. I'm just trying to be a part of your life again. You know, make up for lost time." He stepped forward, but Izuku took a step back, his heart racing as the memories began to flood back, the shouting, the hurt, the neglect. Hisashi wasn't a man to apologize. He never had been. "Just leave," Izuku said again, his voice tight with restraint. He felt like he might snap if he didn't get away from his father soon. But Hisashi wasn't done. "I see your little cafe's become quite the popular spot, huh? Heroes and villains alike. You think you're better than me now, don't you? You've got all these people who care about you, and here I am, just trying to check in. But I guess you've outgrown me, huh?" The words stung more than they should have. Izuku clenched his fists, fighting to keep his composure. He couldn't let his father see how much it hurt. Not now. Not after everything he'd been through. But before he could say anything else, Shinsu's voice cut through the tension. "Is everything okay here?" Shinso had been watching from his usual spot by the window, his eyes narrowing when he noticed the conversation. Izuku couldn't even glance in his direction. He couldn't let Shinso get involved, not like this. Izuku forced a smile, though it felt strained. "Yeah, it's fine. But a family thing." Hisashi turned to Shinso, sizing him up. "Oh, another one of your friends, Midoriya?" he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "How sweet." Shinso didn't take the bait. "I'll be out of here if you don't need me, Izuku. But if you need to talk or anything, I'm here." Izuku's chest tightened at the offer, but he nodded silently, his focus now entirely on his father. He wasn't about to let this man ruin his cafe, not again. Hisashi snorted. "What? You've got someone to fight your battles for you now? How pathetic." Izuku's pulse raced, but he held his ground. "No. I've just got friends who know how to treat me right." Hisashi's eyes flashed with something unreadable before he straightened up, smirking once more. "Whatever. I didn't come here for a lecture." He turned to leave, pausing just before he exited. "I'm sure we'll see each other again, son. Just don't think you're too good for me now. I'll be around." And with that he was gone. Izuku stood there for a moment, motionless, his fists still clenched. The silence in the cafe was almost deafening. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding his breath until he let it out in a sharp exhale. His hands were shaking slightly, but he quickly shoved them into his pockets, trying to regain some sense of control. Shinso stood up, walking over to him with a concerned look on his face. "Izuku, are you okay?" Izuku nodded, though it wasn't convincing. "I'll be fine." But Shinso wasn't convinced. "I know it's none of my business, but you don't have to face this alone, you know." Izuku gave him a small smile, though it was shaky. "I know. Thanks, Shinso." The day dragged on after that. Izuku moved through it mechanically, his thoughts elsewhere, his attention split. He'd never thought he'd have to deal with this again. Not after everything he had built. But now, with his father's shadow hanging over him once more, Izuku wasn't sure what to feel. Now, you might be thinking, where the heck did Bakugo go? And the truth is, I was just too lazy to put him in. But this is around the time of their exams, before the camp trip. Anyway, toodles. It was a quiet night at the Greenlit Café. The chairs were turned upside down on the tables, the floor had been swept twice over, and the soft hum of the refrigerator was the only noise that accompanied Izuku as he scrubbed the last of the coffee stains from behind the counter. He let out a soft breath, taking a moment to appreciate the stillness. Today had been busy, but fulfilling. The kind of day that made him feel like he was doing something right. He flicked off the lights, save for the warm glow from the hanging lamp above the espresso machine. His hoodie hung loosely over his shoulders, sleeves pushed up just past his elbows. He was about to head upstairs when it happened. The air shifted. A chill rushed in where there had been none. Before he could react, a swirling mass of darkness opened in the middle of the room, splitting reality open like a zipper. A hand shot out from the black void and grabbed his wrist. "What?" he gasped, stumbling backward. But it was too late. The portal yanked him in. Izuku landed hard on a cold concrete floor, his breath knocking out of him in a gasp. He scrambled to his feet, heart racing, vision still spinning. He was in a warehouse. Dim lighting. Tall ceilings. Dust floating in the air like lazy snow. And standing just a few meters away were the League of Villains. Dabi leaned against a support beam, arms crossed. Toga twirled a knife in her fingers, a smile just too wide to be comforting. Spinner adjusted the grip on his sword. Compress tipped his hat with a kind of theatrical courtesy. And Shigaraki. He stood at the front, hand twitching like it was itching to destroy something. "Izuku Midoriya," Shigaraki said, voice rasping with disinterest and threat. "We need to talk." Izuku's body tensed, but he didn't run. He couldn't. "You could have just knocked," he said hoarsely. Toga giggled. "Where's the fun in that?" Shigaraki took a step forward. "Why are you running a cafe that lets villains walk in and sit next to heroes?" Izuku frowned. "Because everyone deserves somewhere safe to exist. To breathe. To be without violence. Even scum like us?" Spinner asked. Izuku nodded slowly. "If they follow the rules, yes." Shigaraki's laugh was dry and humorless. "Do you know what the commission thinks of you? You're letting people with blood on their hands sit around sipping lattes next to pro-heroes. That's a threat to their illusion of order." "I'm not taking sides," Izuku replied quietly. I wanted a place where people weren't defined by their pasts. Or maybe they could figure out who they want to become." Dabi stepped forward now, eyeing Izuku with a flicker of something unreadable. "That's cute, kid. Real cute. But the world doesn't work that way. Sooner or later, that dream's gonna bite you." "It already has," Izuku murmured. "But I'm still here." They went quiet at that. The League hadn't expected this. A kid Quirkless, alone, who didn't flinch at the sight of villains. Who didn't scream or beg. Who just stood there and said things that made their chests twist in uncomfortable ways. Toga tilted her head. "You're weird. I get that a lot." "What's in it for you?" Compress asked, more curious than suspicious now. Izuku. "Peace. Maybe kindness. Maybe if someone has a reason to sit and drink coffee instead of fight, they'll choose it." Spinner looked down, silent. Shigaraki still looked unconvinced. "So you're not gathering intel? You're not baiting us?" "No," Izuku said firmly. "I just make coffee." Dabi chuckled. "And yet here you are. In a den of murderers." "I didn't ask to be kidnapped," Izuku said dryly, then added, "But I'm not afraid of you." That made Shigaraki pause. "No fear?" he echoed. "Not even a little? I've already lived through worse." That silence fell again. Not hostile now. Not even tense. But contemplative. Toga slipped her knife away. "You remind me of someone," she said. "Is that a good thing?" "Maybe." Shigaraki stepped back. "I still don't trust you." Izuku nodded. "I don't need you to." Dabi's gaze lingered on him. "You're different, Midoriya. You're either the stupidest kid I've ever met or the bravest. Can't I be both?" Dabi barked a short laugh, genuinely amused. "All right," Shigaraki said at last. "You've said your piece. You're not our enemy. For now. And you're not mine, Izuku said. Another beat passed, and then Shigaraki motioned to Kurogiri. A portal began to open beside them. You'll be returned to your precious little cafe. But remember, Midoriya, if you ever cross us, there won't be a second chat. I understand. As Izuku stepped toward the portal, Toga skipped up beside him. Next time, maybe we come for coffee, If you follow the rules, he said. Toga winked. Deal. He vanished into the portal. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly as Izuku stumbled back into his shop. He looked around, checking to make sure everything was still intact, and locked the front entrance behind him. The silence was heavy, different now. He was alone again. He walked upstairs slowly, shoes soggy, limbs aching, head swimming with a dozen emotions. He had survived the league, and they had listened. That, more than anything, gave him a strange sense of hope. From the rooftop across the street, a single feather drifted down, settling against the window pane. Hawks narrowed his eyes from the shadows, arms crossed over his chest. So even they're paying attention to you now, he muttered. Interesting. There was something disarming about the Greenlit Café. It wasn't the scent of rich espresso that hung in the early air like a promise. It wasn't the soft hum of low jazz that threaded between table legs and whispered against the windows. It wasn't even the strange cast of people who gathered their students, retirees, pro-heroes, and villains. It was him, Midoriya Izuku. Hawks Kigo Takami, commission hero number 2, watched from a nearby rooftop, legs dangling casually over the edge. A single feather hovered high in the eaves of the cafe, angled just enough to pick up voices through the buzz of machines and the clink of ceramic. He could hear the scrape of chairs, the polite thank yous, and every quiet word that left the boy's mouth. And yet, even with all that intel, Hawks still couldn't figure him out. Observe. Record. Report. That's what the commission had said. Their tone wasn't suggestive. It was final. They didn't like it, this place. They didn't like that criminals were allowed to share coffee with citizens. That Dabi had been seen exiting the building more than once. That Shigaraki's people might one day stroll through those doors, order a macchiato, and sit peacefully beside a mother and her child. It tainted the image of justice, they said. But to Hawks, it looked like peace. Or at least something like it. He leaned back against the ledge, staring up at the afternoon sky. Below, the cafe was alive, laughter bubbling from behind the counter, warm chatter filling every available seat. He could hear the cafe owner's voice now, chipper despite a recent cold, his tone patient and genuine as always. Take your time, no rush, Izuku was saying to a customer. Hawks had heard him say it a dozen different ways, to dozens of different people. It didn't matter who walked through the door. The energy didn't shift. The boy didn't judge. And maybe that's what the commission was afraid of. Because Izuku Midoriya was doing what the world couldn't. He was making villains. Human. Relatable. Harmless, even. And in a world where the line between good and evil defined entire industries, that kind of compassion was dangerous. But Kigo had never been good at seeing the world in black and white. That was something the commission drilled into him: heroes versus villains. Order versus chaos. Pick a side and don't ask questions. Yet now, here he was, watching a quirkless 15-year-old kid serve coffee with more grace and compassion than most top-tier heroes. And he was supposed to shut it down. He remembered the briefing like a bad dream. It wasn't long ago. The boardroom had been cold, sterile. A few files lay open on the table. One of them had a green-haired boy's face on it. We believe the Greenlit Café is becoming a hub for villain activity, a gray-suited woman had said, fingers laced neatly on the table. Your mission is simple: observe the owner, collect evidence, and determine if this business poses a risk to public safety. He'd raised a brow. Midoriya Izuku? Isn't he just a kid? Exactly. Which makes his connections all the more concerning. He may be a pawn or something more dangerous. Dangerous? That didn't track. But Hawks had nodded, played the role, took the assignment. And now, weeks into it, he was starting to wonder what game the commission was really playing. Down below, the cafe was winding down. Customers filtered out, waving their goodbyes. Izuku swept the floors like he always did, a cloth over his shoulder, eyes slightly tired but content. A soft hum escaped his lips as he wiped the counter. No guards. No threats. Just a boy running a cafe. The feather picked up snippets of a conversation. "Thanks for stopping by, Mr. Sato. I'll have those honey pastries next week. Have a good night, Izuku." To us. Normal. Too normal. And that normalcy was beginning to gnaw at Hawks like a loose thread in a tight uniform. Because if this was villainy, if this was what the Commission considered tainting hero society, then what did that say about the society he'd given his life to protect? He frowned. Something else was bothering him. Not just the peace of it all, but the fragility. Izuku was a good kid, but he was still just that, a kid. Vulnerable. Alone. And should the Commission deem the cafe a threat, Hawks knew what would come next. But wouldn't just ask him to watch. They'd ask him to act. Night settled over the city like a velvet blanket. Stars blinked overhead. The streets were quieter now. Izuku flipped the sign to closed and locked the door. Hawks followed with his eyes, tracking the boy's movements like a hawk literally. He didn't leave immediately. Instead, Izuku wiped down the windows from the inside, pushed in a few chairs, then turned off the lights one by one. The cafe's interior glowed faintly in the dark, a little lighthouse on an otherwise empty street. And then something happened. The boy paused at the door, stood there for a moment, looked up. Hawks went still. His feather froze mid-hover. Izuku's eyes lingered near the rooftop just for a heartbeat. Like he'd felt something. Heard something. Or maybe it was just coincidence. Then he turned away and disappeared up the narrow stairs to his apartment above. The light flicked on upstairs. Kigo exhaled slowly. He pulled his hood tighter around his head, wings ruffling behind him. His feather floated back to him like a loyal companion, settling into his wing with a faint shiver of air. The Commission's words echoed again in his mind. Determine if this business poses a risk to public safety. So far it didn't. If anything, it was a risk to their narrative, a crack in their polished glass. Because if a kid with no quirk, no backing, and no power could build something like this, then what did that say about the rest of them? About the heroes who stood on pedestals and called themselves society's salvation? Hawks wasn't sure anymore. He stood, stretching, gaze still fixed on the window above the cafe. He didn't report in that night. Didn't type up the notes. Didn't tell them about the League's rumored interest in Midoriya, or the whispers he'd heard about Dabi's late-night visits. Instead, he let the silence speak. And for the first time in a while, Hawks found himself hesitating. Because somewhere deep down, he wasn't sure if he was watching a target anymore or a spark. One small, flickering light that could change everything. He just hoped the Commission wouldn't snuff it out before it had a chance to burn. The sky was dusky, violet bleeding into a deeper blue as Kigo sat perched on a rooftop overlooking the modest little cafe that had become far too interesting lately. His wings twitched slightly, feathers lazily drifting in the breeze around him, detached, yet very much alive. One was nestled in the corner of the cafe's ceiling. Another behind a flower pot near the counter. A third, pressed thin between the wooden floorboards upstairs. He had eyes everywhere. "Greenlit Café," he muttered to himself, his voice dry. "What are you hiding?" From what the Commission could tell, the place was suspiciously neutral. Suspiciously welcoming. A haven for villains, vigilantes, even the occasional wandering hero who was off-duty. The word they used was contamination, that the cafe blurred lines society worked so hard to keep clean. They didn't want a public space where villains could sit next to heroes and laugh over cups of coffee. And they sure as hell didn't like how peacefully it all worked under the rule of a quirkless 15-year-old boy. Kigo shifted on the ledge, drawing his hood up as wind pulled his golden hair back. He couldn't risk being recognized. Not here. Not when everything he was doing sat on a knife's edge between orders and instinct. He tapped his earpiece twice. "No activity tonight," he said, keeping his voice low. "Owner closed up a few hours ago. Still inside. One guest earlier. Nothing else since." Static crackled back before a clipped voice replied. "Continue surveillance. The Commission wants an update report on Monday. Any sign of League activity again?" "Negative." The pause. Then, "Don't get attached, Hawks." He didn't answer. The cafe lights were dim now. Only the faintest orange glow seeped out from behind the curtains. He watched a shadow move Izuku, likely heading upstairs for the night. That kid ran the whole place alone, top to bottom, sunup to nightfall. Hawks had watched him scrub the floors while humming some old pop song under his breath. Had watched him soothe a crying child while serving customers. Had seen him, more than once, pull a villain aside and gently tell them they couldn't bring that attitude into his space. He wasn't soft, that was the thing. Not at all. He was calm, level, sometimes devastatingly serious. Especially when he thought no one was looking. Kigo's lips thinned. Izuku Midoriya reminded him of a lot of people he'd lost. People who smiled too much. People who tried to fix everything even when they were falling apart. He hated that the kid made him care. He shifted position again and turned his gaze toward the feather behind the register. Its audio feed buzzed to life in his ear. Silence at first, then the rustle of blankets. A sneeze. A soft cough. Still recovering from that fever, huh? Kigo sighed, rubbing at his temple. The night Izuku collapsed, he'd nearly dropped the mission entirely. One of the feathers had felt the kid hit the floor. He'd caught the vibration of panic. Heard Shinsu's voice calling out, Midoriya. He shouldn't have cared. He wasn't supposed to care. But his wings had tensed that night, every fiber of instinct screaming to move. He didn't, of course. Just gritted his teeth and kept listening while the purple-haired kid handled it. He was still handling it now in small ways. Visiting daily. Watching out for him. That annoyed the commission. Too many pro-heroes were sniffing around that place now. Midnight. Best genist. And if rumors were true, even Aizawa had stopped in once. The commission saw the cafe as a spreading fire. And Hawks was their extinguisher. But standing up here, night after night, hearing the soft music through the windows and the sound of laughter, quiet conversations, a lonely piano playing in the background. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a shelter. He folded his wings tighter around himself, eyes narrowing. Izuku Midoriya was an enigma. No quirk. No support. No sponsors. No protection. And yet, he'd survived alone since 13. The kid had built a community from scratch without powers, without violence, without fear. He set rules and people followed them. Even villains. Even the League. Kigo had been shocked when his feathers picked up that conversation between Midoriya and Dabi. That night had been tense. Too tense. Dabi, full of fire and snarling sarcasm, yet there had been respect in the way he eventually left. Even Dabi didn't break the cafe's rules. That said more than any intel report ever could. Another voice crackled in his ear. Report. Hawks, are you still? He cut it off. Pulled the earpiece free and tucked it into his coat. He was tired. Tired of pretending he wasn't watching over the boy instead of watching him. It was well after midnight when Kigo descended from the rooftop. He dropped softly into the alley, feathers tightening close to his shoulders like a protective shawl. He glanced at the darkened windows of the cafe. A feather fluttered free from his wing and slid under the door. Just one. Just enough to check in. He wouldn't interfere. Not yet. Not unless the League came calling again or unless the commission sent someone worse than him. But he was done pretending he was neutral. Because somewhere along the way, this mission had shifted. It wasn't about shutting the cafe down anymore. It was about making sure no one else tried to. The sun was barely starting to rise, casting a faint golden hue over the quiet streets of the city. The Greenlit Café's windows reflected the early light, signaling the start of another day. Inside, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of porcelain cups created a peaceful atmosphere. Izuku Midoriya, despite a somewhat rough night of restless sleep, had already been up for hours. He had cleaned, restocked, and gotten everything ready for the day. It was still too early for any customers, but he always liked having a quiet moment to himself before opening the doors to the world. As he wiped down the counter, Izuku's mind wandered back to the events of the past week, the way his health had plummeted out of nowhere, how Shinso had taken care of him without hesitation, and how the cafe had felt even more like a sanctuary than ever. Despite the occasional tension of villains and heroes both frequenting his space, it felt like a safe haven. A place of peace where everyone, regardless of their past, could share something as simple as a cup of coffee. The doorbell jingled, and Izuku turned, startled. He didn't expect anyone so early. Standing in the doorway was none other than Shota Aizawa, his scruffy hair falling messily around his face as he adjusted his scarf, a look of mild annoyance on his features. He wore his usual dark, slightly oversized UA jacket, and his tired eyes scanned the cafe before meeting Izuku's gaze. "Yo," Aizawa said with a small grunt, his tone gruff but not unfriendly. Izuku blinked in surprise. "Aizawa-san. Welcome, I thought you would have been at work?" "I'm off today," Aizawa explained, stepping inside and shedding his jacket. "Thought I'd stop by for coffee." His gaze swept over the cafe, noting how clean and orderly it was. "You're already up and at it?" "Yeah, I try to get everything ready before opening," Izuku responded, a little shy under Aizawa's intense stare. "I didn't expect anyone so early though. You didn't have to come all the way here." Aizawa grunted again, this time as though to acknowledge that he had done it of his own accord. He walked over to the counter, pulling out a chair and sitting down without asking. "Well, I thought it'd be nice to get out of the house. Been a while since I've had a proper coffee, and you seem to know your stuff. I hear your cafe's a bit of a local gem." Izuku chuckled, a little embarrassed. "I'm still learning, but I guess I'm getting better at it." He went to grab a clean cup and began preparing a simple drip brew, his hands moving with practiced ease despite the earlier exhaustion. "So, how's everything at UA?" "Busy. You know how it is," Aizawa said, folding his arms. His eyes softened slightly, but his expression remained neutral. "And you? How's the cafe going?" Izuku paused mid-pour, looking down into the cup. "It's going well. Everyone seems to like it here. I've had some regulars even." He laughed softly. "My dream is turning more into reality every day." Aizawa's lips twitched, as if the comment had softened something deep inside of him. He didn't respond immediately, allowing the air to remain comfortable even if slightly awkward between them. As the coffee brewed, Izuku focused on the familiar rhythm, trying to keep his thoughts occupied. When the cup was finished, Izuku placed it in front of Aizawa with a small smile. "Here you go, sensei. Hope it's to your liking." Aizawa eyed the coffee for a moment before taking a sip. His eyes lit up ever so slightly, a rare show of approval. "Not bad," he muttered. Izuku beamed, the praise making his day feel just a little bit brighter. "So," Aizawa continued after a long pause, setting the cup down, "I was thinking of helping you out. You know, with the place." He sat back in his chair, a more genuine tone slipping through his usual gruffness. "You work yourself pretty hard. Doesn't hurt to have a hand sometimes." Izuku's eyes widened. "Help? But I'm fine. I can handle it." "I know you can," Aizawa said, his tone softening. "But that doesn't mean you always should. Look, I'm not one to make a big fuss about things. But it's clear you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself, running this cafe on your own." Izuku hesitated. "I guess. It's just that this place is so important to me. I want to make sure it stays open and that everyone who comes in feels welcome." "I get it," Aizawa replied with a quiet understanding. "You're doing more than just running a business. It's a place of refuge for people." He paused, glancing down at his cup as if collecting his thoughts. "I can respect that." Izuku's heart swelled. The fact that Aizawa, his mentor, his teacher, understood him so well was overwhelming. He'd always been the kind of person who didn't ask for help, didn't want to burden anyone with his responsibilities. But with Aizawa here, offering his assistance, something inside him felt lighter. The thought that he wasn't entirely alone in all of this was something he didn't realize he needed. "I'd appreciate that," Izuku said after a beat, a shy smile forming on his face. "Really, I would. But I don't want to take up too much of your time." Aizawa raised an eyebrow. "I'm not doing anything today, and you're right, this place is important. Let me pitch in." Izuku hesitated for a moment before nodding. "If you're sure." Aizawa stood up and walked over to the counter, his eyes scanning the area before he grabbed a cloth and started wiping down the countertops. Izuku watched him for a moment, still trying to process how easy this was. How natural it felt. After a few moments, Aizawa looked up. So, you've been doing this all by yourself? No help? Izuku scratched the back of his neck. Well, Kaken has helped me when he can. Sometimes the regulars pitch in with cleaning after hours. But yeah, mostly I do everything myself. That's a lot for one person, Aizawa noted, a rare, softer edge to his voice. He then placed his hand on top of Izuku's head. You're doing good, problem child. He continued wiping down the counter as if it was the most casual thing in the world. Izuku couldn't help but watch him for a few moments, feeling the warmth of the rare fatherly gestures Aizawa showed him. It was hard to remember sometimes that Aizawa wasn't his biological father. The man had been a constant figure in his life since they first met, guiding him not only through the chaos of being a hero but through the complications of his own personal life. Aizawa was his mentor, his friend, and perhaps, in his own way, he was becoming something like a father to him. The quiet moments stretched on. Eventually, they finished cleaning together, and Izuku stood back, his heart full. You know, Aizawa said, his voice gruff again as he set down the cloth, I never thought I'd be spending my day off doing this. But it wasn't so bad. He glanced at Izuku, who was now standing across the room, his hands behind his back and a proud smile on his face. Izuku laughed softly. I'm glad to have you here. Really. You're always so busy, so having someone around like this, someone I can rely on, means a lot. Aizawa didn't respond immediately, but the silence between them was comfortable, warm. After a few moments, he sighed and rubbed at his face. All right, kid. Don't make me do this again though. I'll never hear the end of it. Izuku smiled, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. I won't, I promise. They both stood there for a few seconds longer, and for the first time in a long while, Izuku felt like everything was going to be okay. Like the weight of the world didn't have to rest on his shoulders alone. Thanks, Aizawa-san, Izuku said quietly, his voice full of gratitude. Aizawa, ever the stoic figure, looked at him for a moment. Then, with a rare softening of his features, he grunted. Don't mention it, kid. The rest of the morning was peaceful, the cafe filled with the sound of quiet chatter and the clinking of cups. As customers filtered in, Izuku couldn't help but smile a little brighter than usual. With Aizawa's unexpected support, the day felt like a small victory, a victory that didn't feel so lonely. And as the cafe buzzed with life, Izuku realized something important. Sometimes, it wasn't about doing everything yourself. Sometimes, it was okay to let people in. Especially people like Aizawa. The Greenlit Café opened like any other morning. The scent of roasted beans, the hum of conversation, the occasional clink of cups and saucers, all familiar comforts Izuku clung to. It helped him forget the nightmare from the night before, or at least pretend it hadn't left him drenched in sweat and unable to sleep the rest of the night. The dream had been hazy, yet clear in the worst places. A hand gripping his wrist too tight. His back pressed against a wall. Words slurred and cruel. Laughter that made his skin crawl. He shook it off, focusing instead on pouring a perfectly frothed latte for a customer and offering his usual warm smile. By midday, the shop had mellowed out. Hitoshi hadn't stopped by today, and part of Izuku wondered if that was for the best. He didn't want to explain why he looked a little more tired than usual, or why his smiles weren't as quick to reach his eyes. The bell above the door chimed. Izuku looked up, and his heart skipped a beat, not in the good way. A tall man walked in, graying at the temples, dressed in a sharp gray coat and polished shoes that didn't belong in the cozy atmosphere of a quiet cafe. He smiled like he owned the room. Like he recognized Izuku. But Izuku didn't place him at first. Just that he felt. The man approached the counter slowly, eyes scanning the space with casual disinterest before settling on Izuku. Nice place, he said. His voice was smooth. Too smooth. Thank you, Izuku said, forcing politeness. What can I get for you? The man's eyes flicked across the menu. You've got good taste. Surprising, given your background. Izuku blinked. Sorry. Oh, nothing. I'll take a black coffee. No sugar. Izuku nodded slowly, hands moving almost automatically to prepare it. His stomach twisted, though he didn't know why. Something about the man's voice, the way he stood, set him on edge. His words danced on the edge of familiarity. The man accepted the drink with a smile. You look just like your mother, you know. That stopped Izuku cold. His hand jerked slightly, nearly tipping over the sugar jar. Sorry, do I know you? Izuku asked carefully. The man took a sip of coffee, eyes never leaving him. You wouldn't remember me. But I knew your father. Izuku's throat went dry. He remembered now. The man wasn't always clean-shaven and well-dressed. He used to wear oil-stained jackets, smoke cheap cigarettes, and his breath always stank of whiskey. He had a mean streak that flared in the quiet of their apartment, just after doors clicked shut and the yelling started. Flashback. Izuku was 8. His hands trembled as he tried to clean up the broken plate on the floor, the shards cutting into his small palms. The man towered over him, not shouting, but speaking in that calm voice that always came right before the worst happened. You're clumsy, just like your mom, the man had said, leaning in. She got what she deserved, and so will you if you don't learn some respect. He grabbed Izuku's chin too tight, fingers digging in. Your father keeps you around out of pity. Remember that. The pain, the fear, the shame of crying in silence, all of it came back in a rush. And flashback. Izuku snapped back to the present as the man's voice cut through his thoughts. You've done well for yourself. Bet your father wouldn't believe it. He chuckled, the sound sour in Izuku's ears. I think you should leave, Izuku said quietly, forcing his voice to stay calm. The man smirked, his grip on the counter tightening slightly as he leaned in. You always were a little sensitive. Shouldn't get so upset. You wouldn't want to ruin this nice little place, would you? Izuku stood frozen. He could feel his pulse pounding in his neck, his stomach tightening. His body was reacting on its own, muscles locked in that fight-or-flight response he had so often experienced as a kid. Suddenly, the man stepped closer, reaching out to grab Izuku's wrist, just like before. The same way he had done when Izuku was small, weak, and terrified. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. The grip was tight, too tight. His body tensed as the flashback hit him like a wave. The customers in the cafe, a few sitting at the counter, quickly noticed the change in Izuku's demeanor. A quiet murmur rippled through the room. Hey! A voice broke through the tension, loud and clear. Izuku barely registered the words before a hand slammed onto the counter, followed by a sharp voice. You touch him and you'll regret it. The man looked up to see a young woman standing at the door, arms crossed, her face set in an expression of firm disapproval. Behind her stood another customer, a tall man with dark hair and a stern glare that matched her intensity. The man sneered. Is this your cafe, kid? He gave Izuku's wrist one more hard squeeze before letting go, making a mocking show of stepping back. I'm just having a chat with the boy. You're harassing him, the woman shot back. That's not a chat. Izuku's breath was coming in shallow gasps, his body trembling slightly from the aftershocks of the memory. He tried to ground himself by looking at the customers who had stepped up to defend him. Their presence, their support, it was overwhelming. The man sighed, casting a last glance at Izuku before shaking his head in annoyance. Fine, fine. He turned to leave, his voice dripping with condescension. Keep the kid safe, but remember, I'll be around. He shot Izuku one last cruel smile before stepping out the door, the bell chiming softly as it closed behind him. Izuku stood frozen for a moment, the room still too quiet around him. The customers, those who had stood up for him, now returned to their seats, but Izuku couldn't shake the feeling of the man's fingers still wrapped around his wrist, the weight of his presence lingering. Hey! The woman called gently as she stepped toward him. You okay? Izuku blinked, shaking his head to clear the haze. He looked up at her, his mouth dry, but nodded. Yeah, I'm okay. Thanks. She smiled kindly at him. No problem. He was a creep. You don't need people like that coming in here. The other customer, tall, dark-haired, and sporting a sharp, no-nonsense look, spoke up. We all saw what happened. Don't let anyone push you around. You're good here, kid. Izuku swallowed, his throat tight. Thank you. The woman winked. We've got your back. Just say the word. Izuku nodded again, trying to muster a smile, though it felt strained. As the cafe slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the fear and tension didn't leave him. It lingered in the pit of his stomach, twisted and gnawing. He'd been doing so well at keeping his past buried, keeping the nightmares at bay. But they had found him, and with them came the reminder of everything he had tried to forget. Izuku glanced at the clock on the wall, realizing it was almost time to close. The rest of the day went by in a haze of forced smiles, a blurry rhythm of motions as he cleaned the counters, wiped down tables, and prepared for the next day. But in the back of his mind, the ghost of the man's hand and his cruel smile still haunted him. Maybe one day, he thought, the nightmares wouldn't feel so real. Maybe one day the fear would fade. But for now, Izuku could only hold on to the support of the people around him, the customers who had stood up for him today, and the tiny flame of hope that perhaps things could still get better. The cafe was quieter now, the last of the customers filing out as the day wound down. Izuku finished wiping down the tables, his hand trembling just slightly as he ran the cloth across the smooth surface. He had almost convinced himself that the day would end peacefully, that he could breathe again after that unsettling encounter. But the shadows of his past were hard to outrun, and they clung to him more tightly now than ever. The bell above the door chimed softly as a familiar figure stepped inside. Izuku looked up, blinking as he met the tired, yet concerned eyes of his mentor. Shota Aizawa stood in the doorway, his usual disheveled appearance looking more worn than usual. He had just finished a long day at UA, and it was obvious he hadn't come here by chance. Something about the way he carried himself, his gaze always alert, told Izuku that Aizawa was always aware, always watching. "Can I get you something, Aizawa-san?" Izuku asked, his voice a little hoarse, still not quite sure how to feel about the lingering tension in his chest. Aizawa's gaze softened just a little. "No. I'm here for you." Izuku froze. The words hit harder than they should have. He forced himself to stand tall, brushing his hands against his apron nervously. "What do you mean?" Aizawa didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved to one of the stools at the counter and sat down, looking at Izuku with a steady gaze. "You're not yourself." The words were not accusing, but they still stung. "I've seen the signs, Izuku. You haven't been yourself for the past few days. Something happened, and I think I know what it is." Izuku felt his breath catch in his throat, his eyes flicking to the floor, where the memory of the man's grip was still burning in the back of his mind. His heart raced as the walls inside him began to crumble. He had been trying to hold everything together, pretending like nothing was wrong, but deep down, the cracks were widening. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready," Aizawa said quietly, his voice calm and understanding, yet firm. "But I'm not going to let you hide. I've been where you are, and I know it's not easy to trust people with the things that hurt the most. But I'm here, and I want to help you." Izuku's throat tightened, and he swallowed, the words suddenly feeling like a lump in his chest. Aizawa was here, watching him carefully, waiting for him to open up. But the thought of reliving the past, of saying the words aloud, felt almost impossible. I had a visitor earlier," Izuku began, his voice shaky. "Someone I used to know." Aizawa didn't interrupt, just let Izuku speak at his own pace. Izuku's hands clenched around the cloth in his grip, the memory of the man's cruel face surfacing once again. He grabbed me, just like he used to. I was nothing." The words tumbled out before he could stop them, his mind flashing back to the man's grip, the cold stare, the cruelty that had been so normal in his life. Aizawa's expression hardened at the mention of the man, and a flicker of something dangerous passed through his eyes. "What did he say?" Izuku hesitated, staring at the counter before him. "He said things about my dad, about how I wasn't good enough, that I wouldn't make it." His voice faltered as he tried to recall the words, the sting still fresh. "He said my dad would be proud of me, like it was some kind of joke." There was a long silence between them. Aizawa's gaze softened as he regarded Izuku, his tone steady when he finally spoke. "People like that have a way of making you feel small. Making you feel like you're nothing more than a shadow of who you could be. But that's a lie, Izuku." Aizawa's voice was firm now, his eyes narrowing slightly. "That man, you're better than him. You've always been better than him." Izuku bit his lip, the words hitting harder than expected. He wanted to believe it, really, but the past felt like an anchor, dragging him back to those dark moments he couldn't escape. I thought I could leave all that behind, Izuku murmured, more to himself than to Aizawa. I thought I could be normal. But it's like they just keep finding me. Aizawa's gaze softened further, his voice lowering. The past doesn't define you, Izuku. It's the choices you make now, the person you choose to become, that shapes your future. Those people, they don't matter. What matters is who you are today and what you stand for. You've got a lot of people who care about you. You're not alone in this. Izuku felt something break open inside him at Aizawa's words. The weight on his chest lightened just slightly, as if hearing those words aloud was the first step in finally unburdening himself. Aizawa watched him for a moment before speaking again, his voice gentler. Do you remember what I told you when we first met? That you're stronger than you think. Izuku nodded. It had been a simple statement, but it had stuck with him through all the rough days. I meant it then, Aizawa continued. And I mean it now. I know it's not easy, but you've come so far. You've built this place and you've built something good. That matters more than anything. Don't let the past take that from you. Izuku's breath caught, his eyes welling up with unshed tears. He didn't know why he felt so emotional. Maybe it was the relief of finally being able to talk about it. Maybe it was the kindness Aizawa had shown him, the fact that someone cared enough to see through the cracks. I thank you, Izuku said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what I would have done without you. Aizawa gave a small, rare smile. I'm always here, Izuku. Whenever you need someone to listen, or someone to tell you the truth even if it's hard to hear. Izuku nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle in his chest. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel quite as alone. The two of them sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the quiet of the cafe wrapping around them like a protective blanket. Outside, the world continued, indifferent to the battle Izuku was facing within himself. But for now, in the warmth of the cafe and under Aizawa's quiet guidance, Izuku allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could overcome the ghosts of his past. The cafe was quiet for once, lights off, door locked, a handwritten note in the window that read, "Closed today, thank you for your support." The sign felt strange to put up, but Izuku knew he needed the break. After the nightmare, the encounter with that man, the weight of old memories, it was time. He wandered aimlessly through Mizudafu, hoodie zipped up halfway, hands in his pockets. It was a warm spring afternoon. The sun peeked through clusters of clouds, and flower petals danced on the breeze. It was the kind of day that begged for a deep breath and a clear mind. The streets were quieter than usual. He let his feet carry him with no destination in mind until a familiar voice called out, "Midoriya?" He blinked and turned to see Aizawa standing on the edge of the sidewalk in a black long coat, his usual scarf missing. He looked normal. "Oh, Aizawa-san." Izuku greeted, smiling. "Didn't expect to run into you." "It's my day off," Aizawa said. "Zashi practically pushed me out of the house. Says I'm too attached to the dark, like some old house cat, and that I needed to touch some grass, whatever that means." Izuku turned around abruptly, making Aizawa confused. It wasn't until he saw his shoulders shaking that he got an irk mark. "I'm not sorry, just gimme a sec." That just made Aizawa sigh, a small smile making way to his face, not that he would ever admit it. "So, finally took a break?" he asked the green boy, eyebrow raised. Izuku nodded in response, having regained his composure. "Yeah, don't want to get too burnt out, after all." Aizawa nodded. "Say, I was on my way to get some ice cream, you should come. My treat." Izuku was about to decline out of old habits, but then hesitantly agreed. The two make their way to the Pothose ice cream place, making small conversation. Then, Aizawa mentioned having cats. "Cats? How many do you have? What breed are they? Do you have boys, girls, or both? When did you get them? What do they like to eat? Are they—" Izuku suddenly cut himself off, then proceeded to blush profusely. "I'm sorry, Midoriya, calm down." Aizawa slightly grinned at his boyish nature. Before they knew it, they reached the ice cream shop. Aizawa ordered coffee flavored, while Izuku got banana. After they finished eating, Aizawa said he was called to the station to inquire about a case, and left after a goodbye. As he walked off, Izuku felt a strange, warm ache settle in his chest. Goodbyes were always a little hard when they came after something gentle. He wandered again. Trees swayed lightly overhead as he strolled a quiet path through the park, watching children run past in a blur of giggles and sneakers. "You have a nice smile, you know?" He blinked and turned. A girl with messy blonde hair sat on the railing of a footbridge, legs swinging lazily. Her eyes glittered in the sunlight, curious and a little too focused. Thanks," he said slowly. "You a hero?" He chuckled. "No, I'm a barista." "Even better," she grinned. "I love cafes. They smell like sugar and hope." Izuku laughed nervously. "I guess? I run one. The Greenlit Café." "Oh," she said. "That's you? I've heard about it. Some people I know go there." He tilted his head. "Really? What kind of people?" She smirked. "The interesting kind." There was something odd about her. Energy bubbly but eerie. Still, Izuku didn't feel unsafe. Curious, maybe. Slightly off-kilter. "You should be careful though," she added. "Huh. Not everyone who walks into a cafe wants coffee." Before he could ask, she hopped off the railing and bounced away. "Bye-bye, Izuku." He blinked, stunned. "Wait, how'd you know my?" But she was gone. Izuku stood still for a few moments, heart ticking just a little faster. He took out his phone, hesitating for a moment before typing. "Izuku, hey, the cafe's closed today. Wanna hang out?" Later that afternoon, Izuku and Shinso met up in a quiet park near the outskirts of town. They found a couple of empty swings, worn and a little squeaky, but perfect for the moment. "You all right?" Shinso asked, giving him a side glance. "Yeah," Izuku replied. "Just had a strange moment, I guess." "Wanna talk about it?" He kicked at the dirt. "I'm okay. I just met someone unusual. Twice, actually." Shinso raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "You attract the weird ones." Izuku smiled faintly. "Takes one to know one." They swayed in silence for a while, the wind rustling the grass around them. Shinso gave a thoughtful hum. "You're looking." Izuku's face pinked slightly. "Thanks." They ended up talking for a long time after that. About nothing. About everything. Old anime they used to watch. Weird food combinations. Their classmates. Dreams. Fears. Izuku found himself laughing again easily, genuinely. Shinso listened, asked questions, even poked fun sometimes. It was easy with him. Eventually, they got ice cream, again. Shinso got coffee flavored, Izuku got strawberry and walked side by side down a quiet street. "While I can't hashtag Aizawa's secret love child, I like hanging out like this," Izuku said softly, liking his cone. "Me too," Shinso replied. "You're easy to be around." Izuku turned a shade pinker. "You're easy to be around too, Hitoshi." Their eyes met. Shinso smiled. "You called me by my first name." Izuku nearly dropped his cone. Izuku laughed nervously, his face still tinged with pink. Sorry. It just slipped out." "Don't apologize," Shinso said with a lazy grin, liking his ice cream. "I like the way you say it." Izuku really did drop his cone that time. "I am really?" "Emchim." They walked a little slower after that, their steps falling into rhythm, shoulders brushing every so often. The sun had begun its slow descent, washing the sky in soft peach and lavender tones. A gentle breeze passed between them, and the world seemed quieter, somehow like they'd stepped out of reality for a while. Izuku and Shinso strolled slowly down the sidewalk, ice cream long finished, and the dropped forgotten-if in the chat for ice cream chan, and the soft buzz of street lamps humming above them as dusk began to deepen into night. Their hands occasionally brushed, and neither of them seemed in any hurry to end the moment. Izuku let out a small sigh, glancing up at the indigo-stained sky. "It's been a long time since I've had a day like this." Shinso gave him a sidelong glance. "Like what?" Izuku smiled to himself. "Quiet. Peaceful. Just warm, you know?" Shinso nodded, hands in his hoodie pockets. "Yeah, I get that." Suddenly, a faint sound broke the calm. Izuku paused. Did you hear that? They both turned toward a narrow alleyway between two closed storefronts. Izuku stepped closer, peering into the dim space lit only by the flicker of a dying fluorescent sign. There, tucked against the brick wall in a damp cardboard box, were 3 tiny kittens. No bigger than the palms of their hands, shivering, fur-matted, eyes wide and lost. There was no mother in sight. Oh no, Izuku murmured, crouching beside the box. One of the kittens let out another plaintive cry, and Izuku's heart nearly cracked in half. Shinso knelt beside him. They look cold. Hungry. There's no way we can just leave them, Izuku said, already taking off his hoodie and gently lining the inside of the box. Shinso looked over at him with a soft smile. You're gonna take them home, aren't you? Izuku looked up at him. Can I? Shinso chuckled. You're asking me? I was gonna suggest it. They carefully carried the box back to the cafe. Izuku unlocked the side entrance and motioned for Shinso to follow him upstairs to his apartment, murmuring reassuring words to the kittens the whole way. Inside, the cozy space was filled with soft lighting and warm wooden tones. Izuku immediately got to work, grabbing a clean towel, a spare blanket, and a small plastic bin. Shinso helped set up a temporary little bed for them in the living room, and Izuku disappeared into the kitchenette to warm up a shallow dish of milk. Won't they need special formula? Shinso asked, watching him. Yeah, Izuku said, frowning. But it's too late to find a vet or pet store. This will have to do for tonight, just until they're stable. They sat cross-legged on the floor, watching the kittens carefully lap at the milk, nuzzle the blanket, and curl up together. One of them, gray with a tiny white spot on its nose, climbed into Izuku's lap and promptly fell asleep. Izuku looked up at Shinso, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? Shinso tilted his head. You're giving them a chance. Just like someone should have given you. Of course it's the right thing. Izuku's eyes softened. He reached out and nudged Shinso's shoulder. You always say the right thing, huh? Shinso smirked. Only when it counts. An hour passed. The kittens were warm, fed, and sleeping soundly in the bin by the coffee table. Izuku had pulled out an old animated movie from his DVD shelf and queued it up. He looked over at Shinso. You don't have to stay, but... Shinso raised an eyebrow. But... Izuku bit his lip. I wouldn't mind the company. Shinso grinned. Then I guess I'm staying. They both settled onto the couch, a large fuzzy blanket pulled over their laps, the TV flickering softly in front of them. Izuku curled up slightly, eyes already starting to droop, the stress of the past few days finally loosening its grip. Shinso, half focused on the movie, glanced down and found Izuku's head resting gently against his shoulder. He didn't say anything. He just tilted his head slightly so it rested on Izuku's. By the time the movie ended, both of them were fast asleep. The TV hummed quietly in the background. The kittens snored softly in their bin. And on the couch, under the dim glow of a single lamp, Izuku and Shinso slept side by side, peaceful, safe, warm. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds in hazy stripes. Izuku stirred first, blinking blearily before realizing exactly where he was and who he was still leaning against. His face flushed immediately, but he didn't move. Shinsu's head was still on his, breath slow and even, one arm loosely draped around Izuku's shoulders sometime during the night. Izuku smiled softly to himself. Maybe this was what it meant to start healing. The soft sounds of mewing were what stirred Izuku awake. Still wrapped in a blanket, he blinked up at the ceiling for a moment, registering the familiar warmth at his side. He turned his head slowly. Shinso, still half asleep, had one arm tucked beneath his head, the other loosely resting over the blanket they'd shared. His hair was tousled, his expression calm in sleep. Izuku's cheeks warmed. But the mewling continued. The kittens, he whispered, eyes widening. Carefully disentangling himself, Izuku slipped off the couch and padded over to the bin near the coffee table. 3 tiny faces blinked up at him, tails twitching. The smallest one let out another squeaky meow. He crouched beside them, brushing a hand over their little heads. Good morning, he whispered, smiling. You hungry? Behind him, Shinso mumbled. They're not the only ones. Izuku snorted. You want pancakes? I want coffee, Shinso said, voice raspy with sleep. Noted. Once the kittens were fed and gently wiped down with a damp cloth, Izuku carried their makeshift nest downstairs, setting it carefully near the large window in the cafe where the sun poured in. He crouched next to them, tucking a warm towel around the edges. I can't leave you guys alone upstairs all day, he murmured. And besides, I think you'll like the company down here. Sure enough, the moment the cafe opened, curious coos and gasps followed. Oh my gosh, are these yours? Mina squealed, kneeling beside the kittens with sparkles in her eyes. When did this happen? They were abandoned in an alley, Izuku explained, drying a mug. Shinso and I found them last night. Uraraka leaned over her table, grinning. Are they staying? Please say they're staying. I need for now, Izuku said, cheeks pink. I didn't really plan this, but well, they need somewhere warm. One of the kittens climbed out of the box and began tottering across the floor toward the counter, tail held high. Shinso, now leaning against the bar with a steaming mug in hand, looked down at the kitten. It meowed up at him. He deadpanned, they're already planning a coup. Izuku laughed, picking up the brave little one and placing her gently back in the box. As the morning rolled on, the cafe buzzed with its usual calm chatter punctuated now by bursts of affection over the kittens. Even the more stoic customers softened, reaching down to offer a cautious slide or a small saucer of warm milk. They're good for business, Kaminari observed with a grin, slurping his smoothie. They're good for morale, Jiru corrected, kneeling beside the box and letting one kitten bat at her headphone jack. Todoroki appeared mid-morning, eyes drifting to the new arrivals before quietly sitting at his usual seat. He didn't say much, but he stayed longer than usual, sipping slowly at his tea while one of the kittens curled up against his shoe. By early afternoon, the cafe was filled with a gentle kind of joy. Laughter, soft purring, and the click of photos as even the most hardened pro heroes who occasionally passed through the Greenlit Café couldn't help but snap a few shots. One of the older customers leaned over and whispered, "This place just keeps getting better, kid." Izuku smiled, ducking his head shyly. Thank you. From behind the bar, Shinso watched the whole thing unfold, arms crossed, an amused quirk to his lips. You've accidentally created a cat cafe, he said dryly. Izuku blinked. Oh no. Oh yes. As the day wound down, Izuku gently placed a small sign on the counter beside the register. The Greenlit Café is now home to 3 very small, very curious kittens. Please be kind and cautious. They bite, but only a little. By evening, the kittens were snoozing in a cozy pile near the heater. One had claimed a bar stool. Another had fallen asleep in Mina's scarf. The third had taken to perching behind the pastry case like a tiny guardian. Izuku leaned back against the counter, stretching. Tired? Shinso asked, setting down his empty cup. Kind of, Izuku admitted. But it was a good day. Shinso nodded, then smirked. So, what are their names? Izuku blinked. Names? You didn't think you could just bring them in here and not name them, did you? Izuku hesitated. I didn't want to get too attached. They already live here. Fair point. They ended up naming them after things in the cafe. The bold, curious one became Espresso. The sleepy, quiet one was dubbed Muffin. And the smallest one, shy but surprisingly fast, was named Chai. The customers approved. The kittens approved more. That night, when the cafe finally closed, Izuku carried the kittens back upstairs in their bin. Shinso helped clean up, then hesitated at the door. You sure you're okay with this? He asked. With the kittens? Izuku smiled. Yeah. I think I needed them just as much as they needed me. Shinsu's expression softened. I meant with everything. Izuku looked at him. And in that moment, with warm lighting, soft purring, and the scent of tea still hanging in the air, he realized something. He wasn't alone anymore. He nodded. Yeah. I think I'm okay. It was one of those lazy afternoons at the Greenlit Café. The ceiling fan hummed a quiet rhythm overhead while the smell of cinnamon and vanilla drifted through the space. Izuku stood behind the counter wiping down a tray, his movements relaxed. A couple of regulars sipped tea near the front window, soft jazz humming in the background. Kittens curled in a sunbeam near the bookshelf, one of them swatting lazily at the tassels on a cushion. Then the door burst open. "Yo, nerd." The bell above the door jingled as Bakugo stepped inside, hair windswept and face set in its usual scowl. But something about him was lighter today. Not quite relaxed, but content? Izuku blinked. "Kaken? You're early." Bakugo rolled his eyes and grunted, walking up to the counter. "I was in the area. Figured I'd stop in before things get crazy." Izuku tilted his head. "Crazy?" Bakugo tossed a protein bar onto the counter and reached for one of the kittens, who promptly swatted at his hand. "Summer training camp. The whole DMN class is heading out of town next.